of the music listened to today, like on streaming services, or music back from that day?
Commercial.
On like streaming, so like Spotify, Amazon, all that. People want to hear that music.
People from the era know how to use Spotify. If people from the era know how to use Spotify.
Stop that.
That's ages, Eddie.
You're an ageist. And you're an ableist too.
I got a club at the Demarcation Church.
We trying to find out who likes it. That's why
I've been there, but
That's my friend's club. Like Danny.
the Jamaican?
No, it's church.
Like, you know, this brother here, they from Philly. He's another relation, this song. Yeah, William Muhammad. Found some of those books.
I have a printer, so I can just read it on my computer. That's why I sent it to you.
Oh, I didn't open anything.
Nah, it's too early to be on Facebook.
Yeah.
Get some
One
momentum.
was
Philosophical problems of particle physics.
that one.
He got momentum. I'll be like,
Business science.
it's about momentum.
That one was. I don't want to buy it. It's like
You know, it's be feeling good now.
no, but I was like, I'm not gonna give up. I want to find it.
Yeah. You know, Eddie
They
asked me
like
about
film
some of the
too. They
books,
whole film.
and I sent them titles, and he
We
found them
can do the whole film part.
digitized online, like Philosophical Problems of Particle Physics, Lenin.
It's a lot. That one I couldn't find, but physical problems of physical science as well.
Even your photo that I took of you, I'm a Google guy.
I'm still excited, man. Yeah, I know you guys have given up, but on what? On feeling physics.
Tony feeling good today. He is a party girl too.
I know I am.
But you got a party in Oakland too.
Oh yeah, she's party girl.
She got party in
If I was
Oakland.
doing it for
That's a vibe.
shoot, I
It's
used to
a vibe. It's sort of cyclic. It comes back around.
So never.
It goes back around.
That's all I'm looking about. Getting coffee. I got to call coffee. I can't call that means everybody be like, let's
Always perpetrate.
I got hate seeing that.
So there's like there's two Soviet dudes writing two different books, and there's a third one that's like a guy who
Wait, does he use like you? Wait, no. That's how you're supposed to yeah, he's surprised with you.
Man, J-Lo, I told J-Lo,
oh,
we're going to have a coffee house.
I was like, no.
My daughter,
I found them on
I'm serious having a coffee house at the house, but I'm serious about opening up.
You want to have one at your house?
Yeah, but I'm thinking about talking to one of my other
They're on
partners.
like 8
Because
books.
you know I'm
Yeah,
going
he was there. He had to like hold on to
some
The
stuff.
only one on the you don't have like a.
So we can not just we come here and have another place. You can chill like, yo. No, I'm not kidding. You ain't chilling.
I'm chilling like we're doing, man.
Yeah.
It's like a live orchestra. And they're playing with
Because you want to hear so because you like your music.
But like, I think
You know what I mean? Your crew.
the fact that
Then you
Yeah,
can
it's yourself back in the day.
all the bodies
Cats come in, party,
used,
and then
I
you
was like,
come
whoa,
in,
that's sexist.
you get everybody up,
And it was
grab
just
a
funny
girl,
because you got to see all these moments.
and see, I was the more shy type.
I believe that though. That's something.
People see me read books 24, 24, and they know I still go out and party. But they know that I'm not playing around. They know that I'm not playing around. They know that I'm not playing around that, I'm not playing around about what I'm doing. But I do have like let's be able to meet three people at the door. And knowing that we try to talk to them about something, if you didn't get a few, you can't get everybody, but you do get one or two to be like, oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, of course you ain't read nothing huge.
They bring Caleb.
We love that in our cross. I've been putting this thing in
But that means the speaker.
Huh?
But that means it's a
She
speaker.
didn't respond to it though.
Wow.
That was busted up. He was walking in here
I'm
loud.
saying it all the time. It'd be like we had a,
When he walked in.
he'd be
That's
talking
great,
about,
that's enough.
we were supposed to have a lecture today. We ain't gonna happen because you gave us a party jam
got
earlier in
us
the
a
morning.
whole-hour
You
party
know, party jam. I'm like,
Crazy, I know.
I'm fine now.
He thought we was gonna be Hegel.
Yeah, we is doing Hegel. This is,
Oh yeah, that is that.
this is all
The dialectic.
get the phenomenology, phenomenal thing about trying to discuss something. You gotta have all your brains working.
That's right.
If you only have like a fraction, you gotta make a fraction out of what you're talking about.
That's why, you know,
This is some serious
that's why
business.
philosophy professors turn everybody off from philosophy.
That's true.
Because they
Those
come in
dry.
there, they so simple.
They've always been so dry, you know.
Somebody, give me one more song. Give me one
Just
more.
keep walking
Give me one more
around.
before you hit. You mess around. You got the Mastro thing going on. So I gotta get him one of those Mastro things.
Derek want me to play one more song.
Gotta play one more song. I'm sorry, y'all.
No, that's
Get the
okay.
groove started.
Oh, sorry, you got something.
Yeah, what's the, you ever see the person that had like that Mastro stick? And they try to get the Mastro stick.
Yeah,
Yeah. What you call it?
Like the conductor?
Yeah, yes, but I just call it Mastro. It's Mastro.
I love baby. What's up, Eddie? What you doing?
we're looking for physics things.
Oh, okay.
Hegel done opened him way up, man. He's a different Eddie now.
Orchestra thing tomorrow?
It's an intelligent organization. You know how somebody say,
You asked me
you know how somebody say, if you properly intelligent, and they well, I'm using that as the way what you doing. There's no apartment
like
for fooling around. So, oh, this is an apartment for intelligent service. Because people are not really thinking about why they use the word intelligent to make somebody feel smart, not being smart. This is about living intelligence. This is not like being intelligent.
How can you live without it?
Yeah.
I had to rethink about get you thinking about it. You know what I'm saying?
Only 2 hours.
Get right. Coffee house. You'll be like, we got food and we got coffee, but we have stuff.
Oh, you're going to 2 shows on Sunday?
Yeah.
Back to back.
I ended up becoming I talked to one of the ushers because I'm the president of my union. That's where I work. As I was from Vancouver. And he gives us a business card and he was like, "Hey, your sister."
That book, Philosophical Problems of Particle. Let's get into it together. You start reading. I want because, you know, this is complicated.
How many people?
For a live show.
How deep are you in right now?
2
I'm
hours.
giving that books.
You might see Stevie Wonder.
Oh, you've read this before. You want to say the title? You can. You read particle physics and you do.
We're sales.
Right before his music.
It's all, you know, it's all in
You got work today?
being the same thing. It's like that. You get into that groove. You know, it's a groove.
Okay. I'm in the group right now.
But you know,
Actually, we chose the 60.
yeah. Hey, Dig, poor thing. We gotta,
That's not.
cause I'm still your dissertation phenomenology. Her work.
This week.
Yeah, we'll holler at each other.
Doc, you know his side.
All about.
Doc, you know his started?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Michelle.
That's the song right there.
I asked if he wanted to get started. He said, yeah, but it's just a song. It's just a song that he Light?
Where did you
No,
Yeah,
he
yeah,
stopped it.
I tried. I don't know it was working.
No.
Yeah.
There's a heaven above. After
Should I check out?
we ready, y'all?
I found the link.
I can get a hand
We're
clap.
live? Okay. Okay. Are we gonna put the text up on the, and then you'll read it? Oh, you wanna read? Oh, great, Sarah.
No, okay, I didn't know he
Whoever,
wanted me to.
no.
Depends what
I
you-
have no preference.
Eddie wants to read.
No, I actually don't.
Alright.
Yeah, Eddie printed.
That doesn't matter.
He has the printed.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We're starting a little bit late. We had to do a little bit of the study of music.
Soul force.
The soul force. But we're going to continue our reading of and study of The Science of Logic by Hegel. I want to talk a little bit in introduction again, why we are reading this and how it is not unconnected to the world, the complex world that we live in. And I want to say something about the intellectual maturation of young people and how it is important for young people to take on great works while they're young.
Yeah.
If you, but we'll come back. I want to tell you, it's a pedagogical question. It's a question of learning. It's a question of ideological and political development. And the opposite side of that is why does it not occur? But first things first, and that is the possibility of war in the Ukraine. It is a war that the Biden administration wants. It is a war that the Russians do not want. It is a war that the only benefit to the Biden administration would be political in a overall ideological struggle with, pardon me, the rising China and rising Russia and rising developing world, as it were. You know, I don't know if any of you listened to Biden's speech yesterday on Ukraine, where he said that he is certain that Russia will invade Ukraine. He didn't go into any detail about what he meant by a Russian invasion. If the Russians do go into Ukraine, it would be as a result of a provocation of the Ukrainians in the Donbass area. Ukraine is a country that is has a unique history, both as in its own terms, but as a part of the Tsarist Empire, and then as a part of the Soviet Union. It is so integral to the Soviet Union that many of the top leaders of the Soviet Union were Ukrainians. But there are two Ukraines, as it were. And Ukraine is divided by language. You know, what we call the color line over here, in places like the Ukraine and other parts of Eastern and Central Europe and even Asia, the dividing line is language. And in the Ukraine, you have Ukrainian speakers and you have Russian speakers. They have lived peacefully together, intermarried, and so on. But with the U.S. sponsored and financed coup d'etat in 2014, which overthrew the democratically elected government of that country. And it was a coup d'etat that involved fascist and right-wingers, profoundly anti-Russian. When these people came to power, and by the way, there is no question about it, the U.S. was the financier, the organizer, and in every other way supported this coup d'etat. Now, when they talk about the current situation, they don't talk about 2014 and what that coup established. It established probably the most right-wing, pro-fascist government in the history of the Ukraine. Just a small parenthetical thing. When Hitler went east, one of his key strategic objectives was to separate Ukraine from the rest of the Soviet Union.
Why Ukraine?
Well, because there's something very interesting, and I don't fully understand it. First of all, in terms of resources and agricultural production, food production, the Ukraine has always been a breadbasket for the rest of Russia. There are also important minerals, even oil and natural gas, but it's also a pretty highly developed industrial sector in the Ukraine. Ukraine has about 50 million people. It was the largest, second largest, second to Russia, of the republics that made up the Soviet Union. So in a lot of ways, if you separate Ukraine, it is like cutting off one of the legs of the Soviet Union. It is disabled. And the two have been so integrated economically, culturally, and in so many other ways. And certainly since the establishment of the Soviet Union, there's been nothing but friendship and comedy between, not comedy, comedy, friendship, good feelings between the Russian and Ukrainian people. And Russian speakers tend to speak Ukrainian, and Ukrainian speakers also speak Russian. Now, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, and I think all of you know how I feel about that. I don't need to repeat myself. If you don't, you can ask me now, and I will repeat myself. Shall I repeat myself?
Clear.
Say it again.
Clear.
Well, why you like to hear me say this, Serafina? Well, first of all, it goes back to who Gorbachev is and what he represented. And I'll say it again and again and again. People don't like to hear it. The normal position is that the breakup of the Soviet Union was the inevitable outcome of a historical mistake, i.e. the Russian Revolution. That mistake led to the formation of an authoritarian dictatorship whose most diabolical leader was Stalin. And so the Western narrative is that the Soviet Union, the October Revolution, Lenin, et cetera, were all historical anomalies, deviations from the normal path of historical development. And this raises all kinds of questions. And the questions around this are the ideological political causes of all of the modern wars in a certain way. In other words, human development must inevitably take the Western model, and humanity must be guided by the West. That any deviation from that goes against natural historical evolution. It's an unbelievable assumption. I mean, just to say it in the face of what the world looks like and the long tens of thousands year history of humanity. I mean, how does the United States, a nation 250 years old at best, point its finger at China? 5,000 years of history?
I'm telling you.
I mean, it's chilling, and it's arrogance that only flies if it is backed up by the most powerful military forces the world has ever seen. Of course, things are changing now, and well, I want to get into that in a minute. But with the undoing of the Soviet Union, this book by a Japanese-American man named Francis Fukuyama, everybody know him, called The End of History and the Last Man. And he said the collapse of the Soviet Union was a return to normalcy. It was the end of the historical conflict. Now, he sold it as a Hegelian explanation. We could come back to that later. I don't think so, but perhaps there is something in Hegel that could be taken out and used to justify this idea that with the end of the Soviet Union and the undoing of the world communist movement, you guys recall I've said this over and over and over again. I might be the only person that says this, that the world communist movement was the greatest force for peace. And that's what it was. I don't care whatever communist parties differed over, you know, and they differed and they argued and fussed and fought, you know. But one thing they all agreed on is the fight for world peace, and that without world peace there could not be progress. But undoing of all of that was, of course, a great tragedy. A great tragedy. And at the center of it was Mikhail Gorbachev, who rose to become the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the most powerful position in the Soviet Union, you know. He was one of the most powerful people on the planet at that time. He did not waste a moment. When I say he, it's not just him alone. There was obviously, he represented a major group within the Communist Party. By the way, you know, this idea that communist parties are top down and everybody is whipped into line and scared to death. No, communist parties are not like that, never were. And our study of the Chinese Communist Party indicated it. And even if you looked at the Chinese Communist Party today, 95 million people, and they got all kinds of political and ideological lines, including Maoism, neoliberalism, social democracy within the Chinese Communist Party. It just happens that the majority, which elects the leaders of the party, are in line with what Xi Jinping is saying. Well, what happened in the Soviet Union was that the three successive leaders died back to back. Brezhnev, who had been the general secretary for maybe 20 years, he became ill, frail, and he died. And then a guy that seemed to be in good health was elected the general secretary. And within a matter of a year and a half, he's dead. And then the guy that replaced him, within a matter, it seems like not even a year, he was dead. So, I mean, like, everybody's dying. I mean, or, I don't, maybe some poison was put in their tea. But, I mean, it's just, and here you had left standing this guy, Gorbachev. And the party leadership turned to Gorbachev. He was young. He was in his mid-50s. He was vibrant. He had held responsible positions in the party. And he becomes the general secretary. But he makes these great proclamations that he will reform Soviet society. To me, it sounds a little bit like Deng Xiaoping after Mao, and the Cultural Revolution and all of that, where they had to, they had to do something different. And maybe in the Soviet Union, the same thing. The difference is Deng Xiaoping had a long revolutionary history. And it was in his DNA, it was in his spirit. It was, no matter what mistakes were made, he was not going to be anything but a communist. And we, in preparing for the conference on the Chinese Communist Party, we had the opportunity to study Deng, and it was very interesting, very, very interesting. And I just parenthetically, see, this kind of stereotype that you get in the West. First of all, communists and revolutionaries of that type are ordinary people. They're no different than everybody else. But it's just, there's something, and I guess what separates it, there's something within people like that most other people don't have. And what that thing is, it's hard to put your finger on it. It's a quality. And they all have that quality. Mao had it. Mao would fight to the death for what he believed in. And it wasn't always the best thing, but they all had it. And Deng was the same thing. He didn't care who did what. Whether he came back in power or not, he was not going to abandon the principles of his youth. And so when he comes back, he wants to save the party, wants to save the Chinese state, and so on and so forth. Gorbachev is the opposite. He never had that kind of experience. You know what I'm saying? He never had that type of experience. He was, and this again is something, if just comparing him to Deng Xiaoping, he was a Russian who looked to the West. And, that's one of the things that, one of the contradictions within Russia, and of course then the Soviet Union. And that goes way back for hundreds of years. In fact, the Tsarist court in St. Petersburg spoke and acted and thought like French people. In other words, in the court of the Tsars in St. Petersburg, they didn't speak Russian.
Oh,
They spoke French
wow.
because they felt Russian was a language of a inferior people. It was an inferior language. So you have this worship of the West, and that goes comes over into Soviet times, they're in the Communist Party. That's one of the things about Trotsky, which led to the clash between he and the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. Trotsky is very, very Western in his writing and his style and his look and everything. He's very Western, you know? And he always felt that the Russian Revolution could not survive unless there were revolutions in the West, in Western Europe. And Lenin ultimately came to the conclusion that Russia and then the Soviet Union is more Asian than it is European, and it is. Yeah. It really is. Yeah. If you go there, you can see it in the phenotypes, the physical types. But nonetheless, so Gorbachev comes, and he comes with a belief that Leninism and communism have failed, the Soviet Union has failed, and that we have to admit it, and it can't be reformed, it has to be overturned, and ultimately that the Soviet Union has to join Western Europe and the world capitalist system. And he's, I have to put it this way, he's very sneaky with the way he did it. He had everybody fooled. But of course, I believe that he was very tightly managed by elements of Western intelligence, the National Endowment for Democracy, because they did things, the West and the Western media greeted his ascendancy and his ideas with such joy, you know, whereas every other head of the Soviet Union was demonized, suddenly he is seen as, oh, isn't he wonderful? You know, he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And he had two basic theories, glasnost, which meant opening up, and perestroika, which meant restructuring. None of it was really defined in detail, just sloganizing. Let me just give you another example of just how the change came. And the reason I can give, because I was there, and I was there, and I came out of it, as they say in the black church, still clothed in my right mind. Yeah. A lot of people didn't survive it up here. You know what I'm saying? They were broken. And that's all over the world. You know, what do you mean there's no Soviet Union? Where do we go now? What do we do? You know what I'm saying? Because so much of how so many people viewed the trajectory of history was this growing unity of the world socialist camp, the national liberation forces, and the progressive and working class forces in the capitalist countries. So we had this idea of three currents of the world revolutionary process. You take the Soviet Union out of it, you take the socialist countries out of it, the whole thing collapses, or is so weakened that it's difficult to maintain. Can you get a sense of it? Now, let me give an example. The chairman of the South African Communist Party, a guy by the name of Joe Slovo, that was not his actual name, that was what we call his nom de guerre, his political name. And Joe Slovo was a white South African who was highly regarded throughout the world movement and in South Africa. He was both the chairman of the party and a leader of what was known as Umkhonto we Sizwe. That was the armed wing of the liberation movement in South Africa. He had been on, the FBI, CIA list of people who were not allowed in the United States. You can't give him a visa, blase, blase, blase. That's the way it was back then. There's certain people who were not allowed in this country. For example, if you are the head of a communist party, let us say in in South Africa or Egypt or the Sudan, you couldn't get a visa to come here. You see what I'm saying? And Joe Slovo was one of those people. However, when Gorbachev came out with his line that communism has failed, that we have to turn to become social democrats and so on, Joe Slovo promoted that also. And he wrote a pamphlet called Has Socialism Failed? I wrote a critique of it, which did not make many of my colleagues very happy. And I'm still, suffering under that. No, not really. But, the thing was, how dare you critique the chairman of another communist party? And my answer was, well, how dare he critique the Lenin, or Stalin for that matter. But once he wrote that, he could immediately get a visa to the United States. You see what I'm saying? So the West was prepared to open up to all of these, quote, reform communists, including Gorbachev. Now, I could say more. I don't, we can do this over again, but I was really disturbed back then with Gorbachev. I mean, what are you saying? And what is the evidence supporting what you're saying? But it seemed like there were, legions of people just waiting for somebody to say that because they so easily rush to it. And some people, because, the Soviet Union, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, well, they must know what they're doing. Even if we don't know everything, they must know, And so a great, really kind of bitter debate broke out. And it got personal, and, back then I was not very young, but young, and, older heads, you shut up, you don't know what talking to me like that. We had recently lost Henry Winston, which could have been that anchor, and believe me, well, you saw him in the videos, calming things down, trying to get at the truth of the matter, but he wasn't there. And so I ultimately came to the political conclusion, and that's just what I said in free school, that I don't know whether I said this, that Gorbachev was a reckless dilettante, narcissist, and fool, or an agent of Western intelligence, or both. But see, here's the devastating thing. Now, we always knew, there was, nobody had any illusions about this, that every movement for change in the United States was infiltrated. That didn't mean that everybody was a high-level, paid agent of the FBI. I don't know, because people can take all this the wrong way. I'll try to be a little careful. But they were just informers. People who would join movements to inform on people. But then you had your paid agent provocateurs. A lot of people who are in jail have been in jail for 40 and 50 and more years, were encouraged to carry out activity which was that was counterproductive. I always talk about the Black Liberation Army. Sounds radical, sounds revolutionary, but it was the opposite of that. And so they carried out a lot of activity, and a lot of them ended up in jail. Many ended up killed. Assata Shakur ends up in exile. But this was not revolutionary activity. It was infantile. I often associate it with young men who have a high level of testosterone and don't play football or anything like that. So they got to get their, I'm going to be a man. I'm going to go out. You see what I'm saying? It was, I hate to, I don't know whether I'm describing it enough, but a lot of young men, when they're young, have a need to prove themselves, and they do reckless things. That's why a lot of times they recruit young men into the military, and sell them on all of this macho stuff, and they go out and they go, I'm gonna go over here and kill some Taliban in Afghanistan, and then you end up catching a bad break and get both of your legs blown off. Then 15 years later, you look back and you say, that was stupid. But it's that young male thing. So rather than a stable political approach to organizing the masses, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the hero. And then, of course, all the John Wayne movies and all that kind of stuff just hype them up even more. But what was the point I'm getting? So agents were in all movements and still are. You're naive if you don't know that. One way you can always tell somebody that is not straight up legit is if they don't have a stable source of income, and don't really worry about it. I'm so revolutionary, I don't need to have an income. Well, I think, don't you still have a need to eat? But it's things like that. The other thing is that person that is always pushing the envelope. No, you ain't doing nothing. Y'all just sitting around reading Hegel. Why ain't you out here, making some Molotov cocktails? If you believe Black Lives Matter, let's blow the roof off this mother. That type of thing. When you see a person doing that, you could say, well, she or he is a bit naive, or she or he is whatever. But you have to ask the question, the political question, who the hell are you working for? But the thought that they could have penetrated to the highest level of the Soviet Union was inconceivable and is still unbelievable to many people. But they had. And when one looks at the speed with which they undid the Soviet Union, the lack of any political resistance, this is, 95 million members of the Chinese Communist Party. There were at least 20, 30 million people. All of them just laid down. What happened? So I am convinced that this was the work of Western intelligence, an opportunist, that Gorbachev was a narcissist and a reckless dilettante. By dilettante, he didn't know what the hell he was talking about. He was not educated politically. He had no political background, and he was one of those people who put his own personal well-being and ambition ahead of the people. So I say that to say that when the Soviet Union broke up, And why, I mean, even if you change your ideology, even if you changed certain other things in your system, let us say, why did you have to break up the Soviet Union? And the way they did it wasn't like the Ukrainians voted, then the Moldavians, then the Uzbekis or the Tajiks, and no, we decide this, that, and that. None of that occurred. What happened is that Boris Yeltsin just said, it's over, end it. You do whatever the hell you want to do. Just so, and that was it. That was it. And then they invited the United States in, and I heard Putin say this himself recently, that the CIA, the CIA, with badges, I'm in the CIA, were organizing and running major ministries of the Soviet government, of the Russian government now, including the military. So they were there from the very beginning. And now, what went wrong? What went wrong? That Russia did not collapse. That's the biggest republic. I don't know everything that went right, but the Russian state was able to be reconstructed. And over these last 20 years, not only did they reconstruct the Russian state, but the Russian economy, and it is not what you hear these people over here talking about, a gas station passing as a nation. No. They have a developing technology, industrial sector. I would say it's one of the top 10 major economies in the world. But they pulled it back together. And now, among many of the republics of the former Soviet Union, there is this thing of coming back together in some kind of federation. What it will be, we do not know. A big part of that is Ukraine. A big part of it. And how that will go, it's hard to say. But one thing is for certain. The governments that have come since the collapse of the Soviet Union over the last 30 years have all pretty much failed. Have all failed, including the current one, which is headed by a comedian. Yeah, he's a professional comedian. And they locking up if you oppose him, you get locked up. And all of this, the place is in shambles. The other thing is that the government of Ukraine has moved from the capital of Kiev into another city close to the Polish border. And the United States closed down its embassy and destroyed all the computers and moved to this city, Lviv, I think they call it. But they're blaming this, and they're saying Russia has all of these military forces. Let me get to the core of it. Russia said, one, NATO cannot move to the east any further. In other words, Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova cannot be parts of NATO. NATO was saying, well, everybody has a right to self-determination, and they can determine who they want to be involved with. And Putin and those are saying, true up to a point. But you can't put nuclear weapons under the guise of these are defensive weapons. Well, they're defensive and offensive, which can reach the Kremlin, which is the seat of government in Russia, in 10 minutes. Well, what does that mean? If you have weapons that can reach, well, let's just say that Russia had weapons that could in let us say, somewhere in Pennsylvania, that could reach the White House in 10 minutes. Well, that means that I am targeting the leadership of your country
Yeah.
to assassinate them, to take them out before they can react. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This is why they're saying, no, you got to pull all this back. This represents a mortal threat, not only to the nation, but to the leadership. You decapitate a nation of its leadership, however you do it, by weapons or by ideology or however, assassination, you are literally disabling that country. The other thing is, the Russians are saying you got to push back NATO. You know, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, 15 new nations joined NATO. I mean, it doubled in size, practically. And they were all surrounding Russia. And they all, and some of them, Romania, I think, Romania, maybe Poland, have nuclear weapons. Now, the United States doesn't go around telling everybody where their nuclear weapons are, but they have them in Eastern Europe. Russia has nothing comparable in Western Europe or anywhere else. I mean, I think you get the picture. So the Russians say time and time again, we face an existential crisis. It's unacceptable, and we want a treaty signed on paper where it is agreed that NATO will pull back to where it was in 1997, that there be no further eastward expansion of NATO, and so on. Now, just to go quickly, the United States has said that they would not get involved militarily in Ukraine. Well, they can. The American people would not stand for it. And this is, you know, this gets to the politics of this country and, you know, the election of 2016 and the election of 2020 and the we're back and build back better and all of that they talk. Well, the American people, no matter what the elites are saying, are not going to support a war in Ukraine. So what they're saying, we're going to impose sanctions, the mother of all sanctions on Russia, to disable its financial system, to cut it off from delivering natural gas to Europe, especially Germany, and so on. Well, everybody is now saying, after all of the hoopla, that those kind of sanctions may have a more damaging effect upon the Western European economies than on Russia, or equally bad on both sides. And this, I don't think the United States, outside of big talk, is in a position to win this one. I think Russia has the strongest hand overall. And of course, the Russia-China alliance is critical to this shift of the world correlation of forces. And yeah, I guess that's all I would say. But war, the fact that we have an administration that is talking constantly about war and preparation for war is something that we cannot be indifferent to or blind to. So, go ahead.
I wanted to ask a historical question, which is, could you expand a little bit more about the rise of Putin's leadership, and also, I guess, this point of how how Russia was able to come back from all of the U.S. infiltration? I think that piece is unintuitive to me. It's surprising that still they could ascend as a credible threat to the West today.
Yes. How could they first of all, restore the state, and secondly, rebuild their military? Obviously, they have the industrial base to do it, because they're not importing engines and other things. So they have an industrial base. How all the rest of that happened, I don't know, Michelle. How they did it, because, you know, Russia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they saw a dramatic decline in population. And much of it similar to what we see in this country, where they were deaths, premature deaths, early deaths, due to things like alcoholism, suicide, and other health issues involved in that. The country went into a deep depression because there were no jobs, there was no income, the education system collapsed, and people were hopeless. How they rebuilt that in 20 years, I don't know. I really don't know. But it is, to me, it's kind of like a miracle.
Yeah.
Well, just one other thing. Putin said in, I forget, maybe 2007, 2008, and has repeated it over and over again, that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. That is a country that lost 27 million people in World War II. And he says that the worst event was the collapse of the Soviet Union. You see what he's saying? He said we lost all of these people, but we did not lose the state. We did not lose the nation. With Gorbachev, we lost the state. But they were able to regain it, recapture it, and rebuild. And I'm certain there's scholarship out there, but I don't know of it. Go ahead.
Well, I was listening to a podcast with Oliver Stone yesterday where they were talking about the Ukraine crisis, and Putin came up, and I don't know if this is like how it actually was, but what Oliver Stone was saying was that initially Putin was welcomed by Western elites because he was not communist, he was not pro-communist. But then the turning point was that 2007 Munich Security Conference, where he told like the leaders of like the Western countries to their faces, like there are red lines, like you have to respect the sovereignty of Russia, all that stuff. But because Putin was seen as kind of like friendly to the West initially,
He was.
and was, you know, he's like more quote unquote conservative. I think that was why they initially like were fine with him. But then, yeah, it was around 2007 that he was started to be viewed as like a threat to NATO, to like the Western Alliance and all that stuff. And the other interesting point I think that was raised was like it's, I think according to like articles that I've read, like part of the reason why also Russia doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO is because Ukraine still wants the Crimea back. And there was a referendum, I think in 2014, where I think the like 97% of I think people in the Crimea voted to return to Russia as like part of the Federation. And so because Ukraine wants Crimea back, like if Ukraine were to join NATO, then Ukraine would know they have the full backing of NATO militarily to basically retake Crimea, which Russia won't stand for.
That's serious.
Oh, go ahead, Caleb.
I think it's me and Anna had taken a class our last year on Russian politics. It was really interesting. She was also here to talk about it, but what we learned a lot from the class from our professor was he was born in India and was actually born during a time when the Soviet Union was still around. And I think for that fact that he has a very different perspective than most of the department at Penn. And one of the things he was talking about that was interesting is just, I mean, I think it's so easy to fall for the Western propaganda in terms of Russia. Like it's just an anti-democratic state. Putin is another antagonistic dictator. Alexei Navalny is this democratic savior. But like, if you look at it in perspective in the history of Russia. I mean, the disarray that happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fact that, I mean, all these safety nets, all these institutions that the Soviet Union had collapsed. And I think it's interesting just looking at it now. I mean, the reason why people put Putin into power was because of the stability. I mean, maybe he's not the most ideal leader for a lot of people, but the threat isn't someone like Alexei Navalny. If anything, like the Communist Party itself in Russia is still trying to like grow itself. And I think seeing that, seeing how, I don't know, that New York Times every day is running an article about war, talking about the Biden administration agitating for war. I think it's just, I mean, your heart grows heavy knowing how much people want war at this time, seeing how much agitation there is. And so I think really fighting for peace now is, yeah, I mean, it's the most paramount thing to fight for that peace, knowing that war is just around the corner because so many of the world powers are agitating for it.
Yeah, I agree. You know, yeah. You know, Russia is, you know, one of the reasons, if you ever take a Russian history course, it's like you going into a study of mysteries. Russia is a mystery to the West. They don't understand it. They don't understand it from a religious point of view. They can't figure it out. From an ethnic point of view, all these different ethnicities. Is it Asian or is it Western? It's just, and they can't understand, for instance, how they defeated Hitler and how they sacrificed so much. All of that, they can't, and then you get a lot of Americans and Britishers that just hate the Russians. They hate them. And they just want anything bad to happen to them. And I think it's, you know, guys like Putin had to wake up and smell the coffee. These people don't like you. I don't care how nice you are, or how intelligent, or how well you speak German and French. They don't like you. And when he realized that, and then of course the collective of leadership of the country realizes, look, we can't talk to these people are not going, they're going to do everything to bring us down, to destroy our country, etc. Yeah, so I wish the Russians well. But then on the other side, in our own self-defense, I'm talking about we as U.S. citizens, we have to fight against this war president. And that's what it is. And you know, in the free school, we talked about this so much that, you know, I remember doing the campaign, you know, Noam Chomsky. This is an election about the climate. You remember? Okay, the climate, I'm feeling you there. But really, this is whether you put in office the neocons. And that's what this, see, and you can't go by the way they look. You know, like you get a guy like Antony Blinken. Oh, I went to Yale. You know, he's so, okay. The guy is dangerous. He's a dangerous ideologue. The other one, the one that looks like the guy from the movie Halloween, you know, the serial killer, Jake Sullivan. These are not nice people. These are not, you know, yeah, just because you went to Yale and you know how to wear a dark suit and look all right and all of that, they're not nice people. And they're people who would plunge humanity into nuclear war. And that's what they're flirting with the Russians. The Russians said, oh, this is over 20 years ago, I read it in the Financial Times. They said, we reserve the right to use tactical nuclear weapons to defend our state. You know, it's so, you know, it takes us, and of course, at the core of a lot of this is the crisis of the Biden administration. When 60% of the voting public says that they disapprove of you, and you ain't even been in there for a little bit but a year, there's not been such a precipitous decline in a president's approval ratings since they started taking these kind of polls. So, there was a movie that came out called Wag the Dog maybe 20 some years ago. And it was about a president who was in crisis, so he starts a war to bring his polling numbers up. So a lot of people say this Ukraine thing is a wag the dog kind of situation. Oh, go ahead, Derek.
So, I'm not unengaged with the environment politically. Growing up from my time to our time then. The thing about it is that we don't have these kind of congresses that like we're this morning here assembled. And neither do a lot of people, have any text to even like say, where are we at? The climate of what we feel and think like, and all the kind of problems that that we are facing here in America, maybe worldwide. If America's going to be like, how high do you turn the thermostat up on political non-communication? The students can't communicate, professors can't communicate. All the things that that we trying to communicate. If we want to disrupt the system of this, us in here speaking today. If this is disrupted, but thinking about Russia and what that was like for myself personally, it's not easy to say that you was reading a book like I was reading a book on Russia. It couldn't even hardly be said in the open. It's my little generation in the 60s, and maybe this a little window might have opened up, but it wasn't like a long-term window to talk about Russia. Not anything positive. You can't even think about anything positive. But right now, can't too much be said positive from my mind looking at the United States because of the devastation that this country is potentially going through. Not what disintegrated Russia. The phenomenon is like it ain't disintegrated, but here the disintegration could be even faster because we don't really think about what this country was like in 1857 or 1856, the seriousness of the impact of those years reoccurring in our time. And this is 2021. Right. And there's no discussion like 22. There's no discussion about what the potential for the disruption of the state of Maine. How about if Florida becomes destabilized and there's no Florida? Just think about all the things that we thinking about Czechoslovakia, or you thinking about things in Russia, but some of the same potential quagmires could be in Arizona. But we're not thinking that everything is just working out all right, because it's not working out all right. The states here do not have a unified way of handling the business. They can't even handle the pandemic, and that's not like a come and go thing. That's just the atmosphere, that's the climate that we live in, that we say climate control. We can't live in an atmosphere that we can handle the business of holding these gigantic states that in the United States with empires trying to hold. Not what Russia trying to hold, which was their territorial problems. It was their geographical problems in Russia. It ain't just having wheat or having corn. It's things that in Russia, like you mentioned about Ukraine, it's things that was vital for the vital link. Like the railroad used to be for Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was like the Reading Railroad was like the vital link, not Amtrak, but there's no thought about how that affected the people in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, the jobs and the industry, everything that was in the industrial world that other people copied about Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Can I just interrupt you? This is very important because even though it's like we're talking about the Ukraine, at the end of the day, this is really a domestic political problem. And it is an administration that's trying to use this war thing, or we're facing war, but we're not going to go to war, we're going to impose sanctions, but as a way to get their domestic polling numbers up. You know, if you, I don't know, well, I wouldn't fault you if you don't look at it. If you look at Biden's speeches, he's given all of these speeches over the last week or couple of weeks about the Ukraine, you know, and he's trying to come off as this really strong leader, and he can lead the country in war, and if he can lead the country in war, that means he can build the country back better. You know, well, come on. I mean, everybody can see you're feeble, and early stages of dementia, of course. So, I mean, stop, you know, as they say, cut the dramatics, man. We ain't got no time for that. And there's inflation, so, you know, that's off the discussion. Inflation, okay, the coronavirus seems to be going down, but how's it going, man? Good to see you.
But Tony's my cousin.
No.
Really?
First cousin.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so, I mean, and I agree with you, the country is in a very deep political crisis. Oh, go ahead, Lee.
One interesting thing about Jake Sullivan is, you know, like there's been like in the past week, like revelations about the Hillary Clinton campaign right before the election, spying on the Trump campaign and wanting to sort of plant this whole Russiagate thing even before Russiagate became a thing. But actually Jake Sullivan was part of Hillary Clinton's campaign back then. So it's, I don't know, it's just really fascinating to see like the continuity of basically like the war agenda,
That's right, yes.
and how much it was integrated with like the Clinton campaign and now the Biden administration. Yeah, and just how like intertwined all of it is, and how it's like all basically the same people as well.
Yes, you know, this is so, and you know, once you begin to look at it, it is a domestic political question. You know, all of this war talk and what we're going to do to Russia and how we're defending democracy is all to make a weak and weakening presidency look like it is something other than what it is. You know? You know, it just, and I know it must be turning off millions and millions of Americans, the cynicism of the ruling class, who really are in a crisis of legitimacy. We keep talking about this. Yeah, and does everybody know about the Durham thing? Oh yeah, well, tell them about it.
Well, I don't know all the details, but there's been like an ongoing investigation into basically like Russiagate, stuff like that. And then I don't know who John Durham is.
He's a special counsel appointed by the Attorney General in the Trump years, but he was held over into the Biden years. And they're doing an investigation of where did this Russiagate thing come from? And what they found out recently is that the Hillary Clinton campaign had bugged the Trump campaign headquarters and had bugged the White House. So, you know, so they were
like literally, well, that's like literally what happened with Watergate, like the original.
On steroids.
Even, on worse.
Yeah, because now they, you know, they have all the internet stuff that they could. In other words, you know, Trump was saying all the time, they had bugged me. They're spying on my campaign. They're spying on the White House. Oh, he's just a conspiracy theorist. Oh, he's just a Putin, you know, puppet. Well, turns out they were. And of course, the implications of this are very dangerous. And of course, you know, I was talking to Kathy, we were riding on the bus over here, and sometimes I wonder, we have it right. The free school has it right. Not absolutely, but we knew that all the anti-Trump movement was really about the U.S. empire and about war and putting the neocons back in power, and I mean, they didn't give us a chance. I mean, because, I know I took a beating, canceled on all sides, but they didn't give me even a chance. I was prepared to take more beatings, but now, before I could even take more beatings that I was prepared for and to be canceled more, it comes out that indeed the push to get Biden back in was getting back in power the neocons and the people who were responsible for all of these wars over the last 20 years, maybe 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were, really small at the time. You just don't know. I guess you do know. I guess you do know what it was like. War after war. Yeah. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. Then, obviously, Trump was a pullback. His foreign policy position was retreat from war. Oh, but he's a fascist. Well, if he's a fascist, well, what does that make the war makers? Like Hillary Clinton. You know what I'm saying? And, well, let me just say that, I was asked to do an interview for Black Agenda Report. I haven't been asked to do anything for Black Agenda Report in about 2 years. I'm persona non grata. It doesn't bother me at all. But so Margaret Kimberly, and maybe she's listening, texted me yesterday, Tony, would you be willing to do an interview with us? And so I texted back, yes, when and what is the topic? And she says, well, it seems like Ukraine is a hot issue.
Why she say that?
Yeah, right. So I texted back, I said, well, I think what I'd like to talk about is the crisis of the Biden administration and the crisis of the left. You know what I'm saying? That to me is the hottest issue. But you see this diversion. No, this is a domestic political crisis trying to be covered up with a foreign policy thing.
That's crazy.
You dig what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The same people that gave you weapons of mass destruction, the lie that got you into Iraq,
Right.
and then the whole thing about, Osama bin Laden and the Taliban and Afghanistan, which, I could talk about Afghanistan. I was there, not in the war. But, it's, I was saying to Kathy, sometimes when, just if we were in normal time, let's say normality, young people would be rushing to the free school. I mean, y'all are rushing to the free school, and some young people are rushing, but it is not what it should be.
No.
It's not. And in a time like this, there should be more young people with critical minds and good hearts that want to probe more deeply the political situation in the country. But it seems like diversion is more easy and more available. And that's what I was saying to Kathy. She had some, maybe you want to say what you were saying, Kathy.
It escaped me a little bit. It just seems like it's a question on, I think, everyone's minds. Like, what would make, I guess, the American so much to solve here, and yet there's so much engineering of all of this hatred, this vilification of Russia, drawing these stakes along. Maybe it's Russiagate's. It's about our democracy. We want to punish them for whatever they did in elections. It seems like we're just slowly starting to unravel that, or at least for most people.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, it seems like it's, and then also especially like what would make young people really not interested in war or just apathetic to it. But those are just some of the questions I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, all of this
Speak
is
just a little bit.
all of this is reminding me of that article that came out after the 2020 elections, where people were just upfront admitting that they had manufactured the results in some ways to save democracy in the most undemocratic
Yeah,
ways
right.
that you can. But then what was interesting was that when, amongst my friends or colleagues, when we would have a discussion about that article, it was very clear that there were two camps. Some
Mhm.
people who were very horrified by the idea that you could really come in the way of, due process in this way and just manufacture the correct outcome. Like you can decide that. But the other camp was totally on board with the idea that yes, you need to go ahead and save democracy sometimes when you feel like naturally you cannot have a democratic result. But then this thing about the Hillary Clinton bugging Trump's campaign and all of that, this just reminded me that even if this is out now, I mean the main line that people keep coming back to try and defend all these horrible, heinous things that is acceptable nowadays is democracy and freedom. So I feel like this is really a good time for us to go back to philosophy and really try and understand what it means to be free and what do you mean by democracy. And this all of these things about Russia, just we need to topple this government or that government in defense of democracy and all of that. This just feels like the biggest, or whatever, the only weapon people have in their arsenal nowadays when they're basically just trying to save their empire. And it befuddles young people. It completely misleads them, because democracy, instinctively you're attracted to the idea. You feel that is the right thing to aspire to. It's the truth. But then, I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit.
No, that makes sense. And this is what Kathy and I just, we're just on the bus. We were trying to. I don't guess we were trying to solve the problems of the world, but just how you're talking. What's going on? What is happening? That, and it's like young people on a roller coaster. One month is Black Lives Matter, and George Floyd, and we got to, we have to go on a moral crusade to do away with all symbols of oppression, and then that ends. The life goes out of that, and boom, you're going down, and now you're in a state of almost I don't know how to describe.
Comatose.
No, a state of it's not maybe it's depression, but hopelessness. Well, where. Oh God, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's scary.
So,
It's scary because if Biden gets the pass to go to war with Ukraine, then that's the pass for the next war and the next one, and then to get reelected for the next 4 years and all that.
It's so interesting. I was at the Republican convention in 2016 as a journalist. I have to qualify it. And I literally, you have to, 2016 sounds almost like 100 years ago, but it wasn't. It was only 6 years ago. And, we were in these wars. And Hillary Clinton was threatening a no-fly zone in Syria, which would have meant clashing with the Russian Air Force. And I heard I'm sitting there. He said, if I become president, there will be no more wars of what they call them, wars of regime change and nation building. Said it just like that, which undermined the whole neocon. Everybody knows what the neocons are, an ideological movement within the top levels of the ruling elite that believe that wars are necessary to maintain the hegemony of the United States, and I guess they're right about that if hegemony is your thing. And that's why these last 30 years, all of these wars, you guys have never lived a day in your lives where this country has not been at war. You know, and where there's not propaganda all the time. I don't know how, I mean, you guys never knew peace. That might be part of the problem of young people, you know, where you just throw and you give up on everything. Yeah, and yeah, so that's, I heard, so they couldn't, and he won. And he won because of that sentiment against war. Now, Bernie Sanders animated that same sentiment in 2016. The only difference is that he sold out to Hillary Clinton in that. You know, and good morning, how are you? You know, which is, in my opinion, he's nothing but trash. You know, he did not take a principled position against war. He sided with it. So that's what we, and so in 2020 they had to take it back. That's why, and they knew, if you don't mind me saying this, Michelle, we're gonna get to Hegel in 1 minute.
To the real nitty-gritty.
The Democrats knew they couldn't win with just an electoral, you know, normal electoral struggle. I mean, the Clinton machine is the most powerful electoral machine in the country, most well-financed and so on. But they lost in 2016 to a newcomer and a, quote, nobody. So in 2020, they had to have the normal democratic political machine, and it's fine, but they needed the appearance of a mass movement, and that was Black Lives Matter. It was a fake movement. It was a, you know, so, you know, we know what it was. And that's what got them over. But then it did not lead to a governing coalition. This guy has declined in popularity faster than any presidency in history, or any presidency since these numbers have been, these polls have been taken. And thus they're in a crisis. And so they want to wag the dog. They want a war, or the threat of a war, or the appearance that we're standing up against war. And I'm a strong president, even though, you know, don't believe your lying eyes when you see him, you know, barely able to stand up. The guy is in deep trouble. I mean, just on a person. His wife should have never let him run. But they can't put together a governing coalition. So we're back, I guess we're kind of back to 2016, because now they're talking about running Hillary in 2024. Can you believe that? No, they are. I mean, serious. Just running Hillary Clinton again, and they don't have no, what, Pete Buttigieg?
They're scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, they're going to the bottom. Well, see, here's the thing. Kamala Harris thinks that she's supposed to be the next in line. But she's broadly hated. You know?
Well, is that why Biden is saying he wants to nominate the first black woman as the Supreme Court justice and move Kamala over there?
This is interesting. You mean, in other words, he would nominate Kamala Harris to be the first?
Oh, is that not possible?
No, she's not. She doesn't.
I don't think so.
Huh?
She's not a judge. You have to be a certain level.
Well, you don't have to be a judge to be on
Being
the Supreme
appointed.
Court.
Really?
No. You don't even have to be a lawyer.
Be appointed.
No. So that is an interest.
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't. But But I don't think so either. But, I just saw Kamala, everybody was saying, where's Kamala Harris? Where's Kamala Harris? Well, they were keeping her on ice. Yeah. Because there is a split in the White House. And she's on the Obama side. She's Obama and the Hillary people, the Clinton people and they're holding, but they let her come out for this Munich security conference. I saw her speak this morning.
She's been locked down.
They kept on lockdown.
She on lockdown.
But who knows? Who knows? So I guess that puts it in context of why the war talk. I mean, and that doesn't explain. It's not just because of domestic politics, because I'm certain they would have been pro-war even if they had very high numbers. They could have done it more confidently. But that's a part of it. I think the other thing is the neocons, the Antony Blinkens and the Sullivans and the Victoria Nuland. That is are you talking about bad news? She's worse than those other two put together. So they, but it's the crisis, and which of course brings us to Hegel. The idea. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I just make one thing? Remember we said last week that the identity, because this is something that Grady raised. He sent me. He's always very colorful and interesting in his comments. He sent me a thing, I think it was yesterday, about the concept of identity and ergo, cogito ergo sum and all of that. And what I wanted to say, and this is what my point before, the identity thing is in its becoming. Its identity is in its becoming, not in a static state. Okay? Mm-hmm. This is the central thing of dialectics. To know a thing is to understand it in its becoming. The other way to put it is to understand it in its negation. That's a hard one for Jerry. But we'll come back to that. Go ahead, Emily.
Well, speaking of Grady, Grady commented and asked another historical question of what is the singular most unarguable evidence of the U.S.'s role in the 2014 Ukrainian coup. And Todd Doherty replied, you should watch the Oliver Stone documentary. But I wasn't sure if you wanted to comment.
No. Victoria Nuland and all of them have literally admitted it. Just put in just do a Google, put in Victoria Nuland and Ukraine coup of 2014. It all comes out. And she was the bag lady. There was at least $5 billion that they spent. And of course, Biden was involved because of his son and their business interests. Hey, man, good to see, man, where you been? Yeah, where you been?
Hey, just around. I haven't worked the last couple of years.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you.
Yeah.
Okay, man, good to see you, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it's all, this is not a secret. Nuland admits it. Clinton, and she was working in the Hillary Clinton State Department at the time. Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, yeah.
And then one last comment is Jake says, ain't nobody afraid of Joe Biden. I'm not going to go to war for nobody's Ukrainian nothing.
Well, that's right. So, Michelle?
I can put up the reading.
Yeah, should we do it that way?
It's just easier for people to
On the screen, I think so, yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm,
Only problem is, we have to
where
put,
did Serafina go?
huh?
Where did Serafina go?
I don't know.
Maybe she went to get her Hegel.
Oh, okay. Is there do you want to give an introduction to Hegel before we read?
Yeah, should I say,
Maybe a few words. We left off a few pages into the introduction last week.
yeah. Oh, here's Sarah. That's okay. You wanted to ask Serafina something,
Oh,
Michelle?
we're gonna start reading Hegel.
Okay. So Sarah, you gonna read today?
Is that okay?
Oh, hell yeah. But
I have my book.
I think we're gonna put it up on the screen.
I think the problem is the text might be different on the PDF. So you want to read it on your phone, or you can also read it on this?
You want a printed version? You have to find it, but I don't know where we're at.
It's the paragraph about reflection. A few pages after this one.
Okay, yeah, just a couple of things. We're going to continue with the introduction. I'm so happy to have here this morning with us my old friend and current colleague, Dwight Murph.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, who is a professor of philosophy at John Jay
Yes, right, John J.
in New York. And we majored in philosophy together at Lincoln University.
This is so cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
And but I'd been talking with Dwight a little bit about the science of logic, and of course you all know my position, and I'll repeat it. Or let me put it this way: there is a reason why young people are not encouraged to read the great works of philosophy. And there is a reason, you know, and I hear it, I don't care whether it's from Kathy or I think I even heard it from you, Alice, I don't know who else, that I wanted to major in philosophy, but I was turned off after I took my first philosophy course. Or people like Eddie, who says to me, and I never knew this, that he majored in physics at Cornell University. Is that right, physics?
Yeah.
And like he told me, I didn't learn much. Is that?
Yeah, I really didn't learn that much.
Yeah.
I gave up.
Yeah, he said, you know, he told me about his textbook on quantum mechanics. And so, you know, we were talking a great deal, and so he asked me would I recommend some books. And so I recommended some books that I had, you know, been reading over the years. One was Philosophical Problems of Particle Physics, and what was the other one?
Philosophical Problems in Physical Science?
Yeah, something like that. And by the way, these are all digitized online. And someone else, I'll never forget, by the way, the time that Serafina was over my house, and in her own way, she was asking me all of these questions about dialectics and determination, and it forced me to go up to where my books are and come down.
No, I asked you
Yeah, you asked me all those questions, and I don't think, we resolved the questions, but the fact that even before Michelle said, Doc, let's do dialectics, these questions were somehow in the atmosphere of the free school.
Yeah.
Either as, I didn't learn anything in college, my philosophy professors were garbage, or my physics teachers didn't know what they were talking about. I can't speak Chabarta and Portugal. I can't. Y'all got PhDs in it, and they say
There's no philosophy in our science.
there's no philosophy. And so, but then the other question is, because, everybody here is very educated, or supposedly, allegedly very educated. But, so people would say, but this doesn't relate to the common man and woman. A youth out here who dropped out of high school, what can he or she get from this? And, my thing is I always am optimistic and positive about the capacity of people to learn. People drop out of high school and then they go to prison for 20 years and they get master's degrees.
Yep.
How did that happen? Suddenly a person who was said to be, was said to have a very low learning capacity is reading day and night and discussing some of the most complicated philosophical and literary and scientific problems. And that encourages me to say that none of this is beyond the scope of ordinary people. In fact, when one asks the question, what is happening among youth? One thing we know about young people, be they in high school or dropped out of high school or in college or whatever, young people are unhappy with the ways they're being educated. They don't like it. They feel that they're being spoken down to. They feel that they're being treated as children, as infants, when they really want, they want the heavy stuff. They want the real stuff. And they feel that they don't get it. So I think this is very relevant. But dialectics, logic, dialectical logic. Why is this important? Again, let me just say, the essence of all things is that they exist in motion. This is primary to Hegel's philosophy. Everything exists in a state of movement. That is not new. That's ancient, going back to the earliest times that human beings thought. I don't care where you go, whether it's Africa, Greece, India, China, there is a sense that life is movement. But what Hegel adds, because he is talking about modern science and the discoveries of modern science, and he is saying what all of these discoveries show is that matter, all matter exists in a state of motion, or, and this is key, a state of negation. When we use the word negation, that doesn't mean canceling. it means that it is the opposite of what it was in a previous moment. We'll get more into that, but and so he defines this as dialectics. Okay? Frederick Engels said that there are 3 laws of dialectics: unity of opposites, quantity to quality, and the law of negation. Now, I think that's the 3 that he said, but I just think there's one law of dialectics, and that is the law of negation. Another way to put it, negation of a negation. It's exotic sounding, and it's intriguing to hear that. I know it intrigued me the first time I heard it. But all it's saying is that what something is now is not what it will be a second after. To understand the political economy and the political economic crisis of the United States, you can't do what journalism does. The economy is up. We created 6 million jobs last year, whatever. No, the deeper understanding of the economy, of the political economy, of the social economy, is to first of all look at it in its totality. Just like you say, oh, the economy is doing real well. Well, then the next one, why you got all these homeless people in Center City? You know, have you been up to Kensington? If things are so good, why are so many people doing so poorly? Why is the economy allegedly doing good and social institutions are collapsing? Well, Hegel's philosophy begins with what we call totalities, holistic analysis. You try to discover those unities of opposites that are at the foundation of the movement of things. Okay? Every opposition is not a dialectical opposition. That's why the concept of negation is so important. Does that make sense? I could say, I could do a feminist, fourth wave feminist analysis, which I'm not too good at. But I could say man and woman, 2 genders, and they are the core of the dialectics of modern society. You want to understand capitalism, understand the gender divide. You see what I'm saying? What Hegel would say, what Marx would say, is that, well, every difference is not a dialectical contradiction. Male and female is not a dialectical contradiction. You see what I'm saying? A dialectical contradiction would be labor and capital. Difference is not a dialectical opposition, not a contradiction. I don't know, does that make sense? That's why, you know, that strong of the negation of a negation. In other words, the movement of modern society is not a matter of me, what I want it to be. It's just like with the second law of thermodynamics. It's not something I wished into existence. It is an objective law of nature. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. This is why the problem of explaining quantum physics, particles, is, gets so crazy. It's not that it can't be explained, and it can be. The problem is it has not adequately yet been explained. You know what I'm saying? And so people, does that make sense what I just said? And I think Eddie will agree, and Purba and Chabarta. Many of the I would say all of the outstanding problems of modern physics, I'm talking about 20th and 21st century physics, are philosophical problems. Problems of explanation, not problems of experimentation. We can experiment till the cows come home. We have experimental data, but we do not have an adequate explanation. And that's why the Niels Bohr explanation of, well, these electrons, these particles, come into existence when we experience them. They do not exist before that. Einstein said, hold on. What you have just said is that particle physics, the physics of these small atomic particles in the atom, the laws that govern them are radically and qualitatively different than the laws that govern larger bodies. Does that make sense? And so, what Einstein, and now others, I don't know how well they're doing it these days, were attempting is to discover the dialectical laws that explain thermodynamics or relativity. Those laws must apply to particle physics. And what Niels Bohr and others said is, no, this is a whole different realm, a whole different universe, and in fact, maybe we've been wrong about relativity, the explanation of relativity, and the explanation of thermodynamics. Okay? What Hegel, and let me put it this way, and I hope I'm not confusing matters more. Forgive me if I am. I'm trying not to, but what Hegel and dialecticians, dialectical materialists have said is that the experiments on particles, on these small things inside the atom, have shown us they exist, but we do not yet have the philosophy to explain the laws of their development. And that's the conundrum. That's where we are right now. At the time that we need philosophy more, not only in the natural, not only in physics, we need philosophy in the social sciences. We need it now more than ever. But we don't have philosophy. What we have is something that, quote, acts like philosophy. Maybe it walks like philosophy, but it ain't the real deal. You know? It is philosophy, it's something that calls itself philosophy that abandoned the great struggles in philosophy. That's really something to think of. That's a disaster, catastrophe. I hope I'm not stepping on your toes.
No, you're not.
Okay.
You're doing good. I was thinking that they need to, that Hegel, they use the term idealism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as opposed to materialism.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll find that Marx got his view from, he studied Hegel, tried to materialize it, but what I was going to say is that when Tony was talking about essence and things like that, Hegel doesn't mean essence in the sense that, you know how you say that black people have essence,
Yeah.
or something. He doesn't mean it that way, but you were correct about essence, I think, about change.
Yeah. Well, see, I think
Change.
may I just, do you mind if I interrupt you, Dwight? I mean, this is a very important question. I'm glad you,
Right.
and all of these terms, you know, concepts, essence in Immanuel Kant were all of those things that we couldn't know. He called them noumena, as opposed to phenomena. He said we can't know things in their essence, we can know them in their appearance. What Hegel said is we can know things in their essence by knowing, and this is him, their logic of development or their laws of development. You see what I'm saying? And that's where Marx gets this concept of social laws of development, laws of capitalist development. You know, that's what, if you talk to any Marxist or radical political economy, that person will more often say that the economy of a capitalist country is in crisis. And it's so bad that people begin to say, well, that's all you always saying. Oh, the sky is going to fall and all of that, and it never falls. But the fact of the matter is, it is in crisis. But it is not always in a terminal crisis. It's like a person that lives, well, I have cancer, but I'm living with it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But the question is that the laws of development of capitalist economies are such that in its becoming it is in crisis. You can define let me put it this way. You can define the logic of capitalism by using the word crisis. For example,
But I was going to say,
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Capitalism in this country has always been able to correct itself in a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it survived, like with the bailouts. Think about capitalism. And actually, we don't have a true form of capitalism. Even when Roosevelt was president, Social Security, welfare system, these are all, as you would say, ways of modifying when it has a crisis. Because it was a crisis when Social Security, we had Social Security in 1930. Before that, we never had it. And the people who were advocating Social Security were who? The Communist Party. So they were the ones who were advocating. So capitalism had to redefine itself. So in some sense, Marx was right. We do have a crisis. Think about the minimum wage in New York City. It used to be $7. Hey, a crisis. People are going to turn this mother out. Now you got to make it $15. It always is readjusting itself. So it is, if you want to say, another crisis. Give me another example. Hillary Clinton with the health care. What was the crisis? Health care high. Obama wanted, what did he want? He wanted free health care for all. Modified itself, Obamacare. So there's always there is a crisis, but the capitalist government has to always do something to readjust itself to make that. So that is the material way of seeing it, as opposed to the idealistic view. That's what Marx is
Yes,
talking.
yes,
And I
yes.
think that's a good way to describe it. I think that. I think you could visualize it that way better. But like you said, you have to know your history, because people don't see those movements. And we're living in that crisis now with the $15 an hour.
Yeah.
I think does that make sense? Crisis, we gotta adjust ourselves, or if we don't, something's gonna happen.
Well, but like you say, it's still you living with cancer. You haven't totally eliminated the cancer,
No.
but you're living with it by doing all these things that you mentioned.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
if the contradiction of society is labor and capital, under capitalism, you're not actually trying to really resolve that
No.
contradiction, right?
That's
You're just trying to hold it apart. And so, in describing capitalism and its constant crises, you're making readjustments basically to keep the system itself intact.
Right.
And to keep, I guess, the contradiction of labor and capital from actually changing society or letting it develop. And so the essence of the system and the essence of society is not really changing, even if you go from $7 an hour to $15 an hour, right?
Yeah.
But you are appeasing the people.
Yeah.
That's the
You
whole
are
thing.
changing.
But so then when, I guess going back to Francis Fukuyama, or the idea of the end of history, it's interesting because it seems like the claim that Western civilization, or especially the United States, is trying to make is that it has already proceeded as far as possible. And it's reached the logical point of the pinnacle of human progress. But I guess if we're looking at things from a Hegelian view of dialectics, actually under this capitalist system, the whole point of its logic is to actually prevent and stifle human development.
To prevent what?
And stifle human development,
Oh,
or
yeah,
the arc of
yeah.
history.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it almost explains to why you had to prevent this argument or this debate from happening in philosophy, because otherwise you wouldn't really be able to think through it or to accuse Western civilization of doing what it has been doing. But yeah, I think this thing of essence versus the surface appearance of things is important, because I think the actual relationship between materialism and idealism is much more sophisticated than it gets presented to be. But I feel in a lot of cases people claim to be materialists, but really just want to deal with the surface changes of adjusting capitalism.
If no one has, if I could respond to that, I think this is very important what you're saying, and just first of all, just to assert that all things exist in contradiction is not to say that we understand the contradictions of the things that we acknowledge exist in this state. I mean, if it were just a philosophical question or logical question, well, we know how things, let's say we accept the Hegelian notion that things exist as a unity of opposites, let us say that. But that doesn't mean that we understand those things. So we have to study them in order to know their particular logics, and that's the same with capitalism. Capitalism, and Dwight is 100% right about, and you're 100% right, it has not remained the same, because in fact it exists in this state of constant change, objective change and subjective change. And I agree with you very much that because societies deal with human beings, you're dealing not only with objective contradictions, but you're dealing with power and the contradictions between classes, between political parties, between ideological tendencies, let us say. So we sometimes, and you hear Marxists say the primary contradiction is between labor and capital. Frankly, I don't like that primary, secondary, tertiary. I like to understand the interconnections of contradictions. And Hegel was very, very strong on this. The ideological contradictions. I think he was the one that used this idea of ideological relationships in societies. Just like you talk about social relationships of classes and so on, there are ideological relationships. And these are very difficult often to identify. For example, take the black struggle at this point. What the black bourgeoisie, and what I'm calling the black bourgeoisie, are that part of the black community that are tied to the main centers of the ruling class. And so they come as black people, but their class interest are really somewhere else. That's in every neo-colonial situation. I don't care whether it's India, Africa, wherever. Oh, this is the best for India. No, this is the best for you and your class. And it's the same thing with, Biden is good for black people because he's going to appoint a black woman for the first time to the Supreme Court. Well, yeah, right. I mean, if that's what you need, if that's what you need to reassure you that we're making progress, a black face in a high place, as they call it. However, and this is what, we try to do in the free school, what are the ideological, what is the relationship of political forces in terms of their ideas? This is what we call the ideological relations of society. I didn't define it as well as I want to. Sometimes the morning. But just let's keep that concept out there. It is not disconnected from the material relations. It is interconnected with them. And by that I'm talking again about the interconnections of dialectical relationships. Last point. I'll leave the particle physics out. I won't go back to that. But there is this idea that distant events are connected, and we don't know their connections. And that's one of the problems of particle physics. But we'll come back to that. I just raised that to talk about, though we have not yet, I don't think, explained it, what it suggests is interconnections of dialectical processes. Okay? Okay, I don't know. So, Serafina,
She's ready.
Yeah, I'll start on 24.
hold it 1 minute.
Which is just the page right after the first page of the introduction. Okay.
Wait, hold on 1 minute. Say page 24.
Yeah. It says whenever logic is taken.
Oh, Roman numeral 24.
No Roman numeral. It's 21.29. That's at the bottom of the page. That might have been.
I think
Hmm.
It is. same state. There's like two introductions. There's like the introduction from like the author, which is like a waste of time, and there's like Hegel's introduction.
I think
Oh, I'm
we're
sorry, I'm
Two
sorry, I'm
introductions.
sorry.
I printed
We
out
left
both.
off on
I got so pissed
On
off.
25?
50 pages.
I was gonna do that. We can do that.
Oh,
Yeah, whatever.
What does it appear on the screen?
You have to scroll through through the like publisher's introduction.
Okay, this is it.
They're probably a little different. Not that much though. Okay, not 24, 25.
PDF page number is 98 or something.
Oh yeah, it's like up, like 80s or whatever.
98.
Okay, I'm gonna go.
Alright.
So it says that these views on the relation of subject and object to each other express the determinations that constitute the nature of our ordinary phenomenal consciousness.
Hold it, wait a minute, wait a minute. I want to be sure. No, it's.
No, you have to go.
beginning.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you guys understand. Yeah, right here. That's where I was reading. The views on the relation.
Okay, okay.
Alright.
I'm sorry, thank you.
No, no, no. No, you're fine. Ready? Everybody. Okay. However, when these prejudices are carried over to reason, as if in reason the same relation obtained, as if this relation had any truth in and for itself, then they are errors, and the refutation of them in every part of the spiritual natural universe is what philosophy is, or rather, since they block the entrance to philosophy, they are the errors that must be removed before one can enter it. The older metaphysics had in this respect a higher concept of thinking than now passes as the accepted opinion. For it presupposed as its principle that only what is known of things and in things by thought is really true in them. That is, what is known in them not in their immediacy, but as first elevated to the form of thinking as things of thought. These metaphysics thus held that thinking and the determination of thinking are not something alien to the subject matters, but are rather their essence, or that the things and the thinking of them agree in and for themselves. Also, our language expresses a kinship between them. That thinking in its imminent determinations and the true nature of things are one and the same content.
Okay, we want to start that over again. We want to go through that very, very slowly because he raises certain of the key questions, key concepts, just to alert you. This is a huge question for what can be known. Okay? Remember, the great philosopher that preceded him, Immanuel Kant, says that we cannot know essences. Okay? We cannot know them. So throw that out of your mind. What Hegel is arguing is that, or setting up the argument, we can know them. Let's read that paragraph one more time. And just read it a little more slowly, if you don't mind, sir.
The older metaphysics.
And by the older metaphysics, I think he's talking about Aristotle.
No. Had in this respect a higher concept of thinking than now passes as the accepted opinion.
Okay, because Aristotle believed you could know things in their essence. In fact, that you must know things in their essence. The Kantian view is you can't know things in their essence. That's what he's talking when he says the current opinion.
For,
Now,
oh sorry.
when he was talking about Kant, the Kant said that, like, you can know the phenomenal world is the world, like Tony said, we're living, experiencing. but the noumenal words, the world in itself, like God, you can't, he says you can't, the mind, the limit, in other words, he's talking about the limits of, he's talking about it's epistemology, the limits of our knowing, what we can know. And so that's what he was really, you know, in other words, we can't, some things we can't know.
Because we can't experience them. That's right. That's right. And that's, so let's see how he continues.
And, and now the other thing is, last week, you were saying that Hegel was Aristotelian, right?
No, I didn't say it was Aristotelian.
Not Aristotelian,
but I'm saying that I'm saying that Hegel valued the ancient Aristotle over the modern British and like Hume and Kant.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about the logic, because I said that what Hegel was pointing out, I think, because I'm just a student like you guys, so I'm just, I think he was pointing out that there's no necessary truth. I wrote that in logic per se. In Aristotle, he had in his logic, he said that universal proposition, that he said that something about it has to imply existence in reality. In other words, like unicorns don't exist, right? So you could have a logic where you could say unicorns and they come out valid. But for Aristotle, and I think that's what Hegel was saying, content, it has to have existence. Does that make sense?
Well, let's see how he does this. I think you're right.
I think
You see what I'm saying? But see, you're right. We are, and this is where he's at this.
The content has.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because see, he's saying, okay, yeah, I hear you. But let's just finish this, and let's see how he does it with this paragraph, because there's certain concepts that are clues to what he's getting at. Wait a minute.
Start at the top?
Okay, no, go ahead, 4.
Okay. It presupposed as its principle that only what is known of things and in things by thought is really true in them. That is, what is known in them, not in their immediacy, but as first elevated to the form of thinking, as things of thought.
Okay, very, very important. You see what I'm saying? Okay, here, I just want to, this is not the best way of writing, but he was a high school teacher, teaching by day, writing by night. But see, what he's saying is, can we know things only in their immediacy? He says imminence. That is imminent in its about to be, in its immediacy. But he says the mind does not stop there. Thinking can go deeper than that and further than that. Let's keep going and read it slowly.
Okay. This metaphysics thus held that thinking and the determination of thinking are not something alien to the subject matters, but are rather their essence, or that the things and the thinking of them agree in and for themselves. Also, our language expresses a kind of kinship between them, and that thinking in its imminent determinations and the true nature of things are one and the same content.
Yeah. This is very important, and I'll just say, just at this point, he has to go further, he has to develop this more. But what he's saying is that he's saying that thinking is capable of knowing things beyond their appearances.
Yeah.
That is what he's saying. But let's see how he further works that out.
Okay. But the reflection of the understanding seized hold of philosophy. We must know exactly what is meant by the saying, which is otherwise often used as a slogan. It refers in general to an understanding that abstracts and therefore separates, that remains fixed in its separations. Turned against reason, this understanding behaves in the matter of ordinary common sense, giving credence to the latter's view that truth rests on sensuous reality, that thoughts are only thoughts, that is, that only sense perception gives filling and reality to them, that reason, insofar as it abides in and for itself, generates only mental figments. In this self-renunciation of reason, the concept of truth is lost, is restricted to the knowledge of mere subjective truth, of mere appearances, of only something to which the nature of the fact does not correspond. Knowledge has lapsed into opinion.
Wow. He's hitting hard. He's hitting very hard here. And it's just what I said. I'll say it again. See, he's going, let me just go back. There's a guy named David Hume, a British thinker. I mean, back then, he's not alive, who was heavily influenced Kant. And they said, again, and this is what we call empiricism. What they said is that we can only know things in their appearances, not in their essence. Hegel attacks that and said, if that is the case, we don't need philosophy, really. And philosophy descends not into the search for truth, but into opinions. Anybody want me to restate that?
Go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead.
When you said essence, I'm skeptical of the word essence.
Wait, before, let me just say what I said one more time. Hey, Dwight, I think you might be a Kantian. Is that fair to say?
No.
Okay, man, you revealing something I never knew.
Can't explore essence.
I don't know. And Hume.
But hold on, wait a minute. Before, let me just repeat, because they told me to go ahead and repeat it again.
Go ahead.
Whew, this is why after free school, I got to go and lay down and sleep, man. This is hard work.
Building the building here.
Yeah, man. You see, remember the previous paragraph?
Yeah.
And I said, let's see how he
Yeah.
does this.
Uh-huh.
He is talking for what in that time, like 200, almost 220 years ago or so, it's almost, I mean, the people involved in philosophy would have understood what he is saying. And what he is saying is this: if you limit our search for truth to only that which we experience through our senses, touch, feel, smell, whatever, if that's all we can do, we will never know truth. We can never determine what the truth is. And therefore, all we can rest upon are opinions. Oh, hey, Emily, that's your opinion. You ever hear it today? I can't say anything about the truth. That's your truth. I got mine.
Right.
It's a matter of opinion. In fact, American philosophy is nothing but opinion, parading around with all this sophisticated language. So that makes it appear, oh man, he must have the truth. He's using a word that's not even in the dictionary. You know what I'm saying? But what Hegel is saying, if that's all you want, then discard the concept of truth and bring it back to all we're doing is opinions. Okay? That's okay.
No, this might be a sidetrack. I'm not.
Okay.
Well, what I was going to say was that Hume was what they call, he was an empiricist.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Empiricist meaning that he felt that you can only, you know things through experience. And so, and he was a skeptic about what you know.
Yeah, that's
And
right. That's right.
Hume,
That's right.
and Tony's right that Kant was influenced by Hume because he was trying to bring in the use of reason, like
Right. But see,
you know.
but let me just
Go ahead.
interrupt you. See, this is what, and let me put it in the starkest term, because, see, again, I am arguing that the science of logic constitutes a revolution in philosophy. It ain't, it ain't like he, worked it out. It's so nice and cute, like an academic would do today. That kind of thing. It's rough. Everything is. That's why, he comes off as the language is not as clear, as I would like it.
Right.
And you, if you read Kant's writing is so much better. I've said this before. Even if you read Descartes' Meditation, so much better. But hold on, let me just make this
I'm
point.
sorry.
Hegel is working something out. The guy is teaching by day, writing by night. He's a high school teacher. Yeah.
He's a rebel.
Well, that's
He
it.
is.
See, they ran him out of the university. One of his best friends stabbed him in the back. Shelling, as the Gap band said, you dropped a bomb on me, and I didn't even know it. But y'all don't understand the joke. But so he had to get a job in what back then was called the gymnasium,
Yes.
which was a high school. It wasn't a gym. And the whole time that he's writing this, he's not in a university where his lectures become his book. You see, he is, so it's not written so nicely, but he knows Kant's philosophy. He read Kant. Everybody knew Kant. But then he was looking over his shoulder at his former roommate, a cat named Schelling, who was the big guy, handsome, articulate, suave, you understand? Hegel's not so good looking, as you see. And so Hegel is saying to all of these disciples of Kant, if all you want is opinion, be real. You're not doing philosophy the way people like Aristotle thought about philosophy.
Hence the logic. Hence the logic.
Yes.
Hence the logic, because what you're getting at is that Hume, just as you talked about, just because he says it here about just having experiences, but you want to merge your experience with the logic.
Well, hold it. Let me, before you go any further. See, and that's what Kant attempted to do.
That's what, yeah.
See, Kant, just what, forgive me for, that's what, see, what Kant, why?
I have doctor's appointment.
Oh, good.
You want my doctor's note?
Yeah, I want to know.
It wouldn't be the first time I wouldn't be able to provide.
Right. Well, just listen to some Smokey Robinson on your way over there.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
But, see, what Kant tried to do is take this, this thing of experience, and then put just what Dwight said, put a rational superstructure over it to, in a sense, make sense or rational sense of empirical experience. Kant writes a book, Critique of Pure Reason. The word critique does not mean what it is today. Critique is a word that meant investigation. Investigation of pure reason. And if Kant is right, if he is successful, we don't need essences. We just need a strong, rational superstructure to explain all of these experiences. Does that make sense? See, Hume said, all I got is what and then, so people say, well, how do you make sense of that? How do you find meaning in all your experiences and Derek's experience and all of that that a billion people would experience? Well, what Hume said, it is culture. It is our cultures that give us the rules to make sense of our experiences. Kant said, no, that's not enough. I will define what are the laws of reason. You see what I'm saying? The laws by which we make sense of experience. And he says that I'm not going to allow it to be based upon, like Hegel said, pure opinion or pure culture. Now, I'll give you an example. Take today. This is why so many people are running after it, like a dog running after his tail. Because they're doing, that's why I say, a cat could be Afrocentric with a dashiki, but a Humean. I won't even say a neo-Kantian. I mean, you Hume with a dashiki. If I went up to Lincoln, I'd tell him that. You ain't doing nothing new. You just put on a dashiki. But look at what goes on today. If I want to major in gender studies, let's say I want to major in gender studies. And I don't think I would do too well, but the professors in gender studies say we do gender studies and we take the experiences of women, got to have experience now, and we analyze it from a female-centric point of view, a cultural point of view, a pro-woman's culture. Okay, let us say I go to Temple University and I say I would like to major in Africology and Afro-American studies. Most people say, what is that anyway? But let's say I do that. They will say, without fear of being called a Humean, a follower of David Hume. The reason they don't fear, because ain't nobody read David Hume that are majoring in it. So they say, we will take, and if I'm lying, Dwight, now you're a philosopher, you can correct me if I'm in violation. But they will say, we're taking African American experiences and interpreting them through an African centered cultural lens. That's Hume. You're not even Kant. Kant said there are rational rules, and he tried to discover what they were. That's the critique of pure reason. Now, if you want to be a Kantian, study with Noam Chomsky. He's a Kantian. And in politics, a libertarian / anarchist. But I'm saying, just like somebody said to me, like I told, Doc, some people, person that don't know me from the street, they, Doc, tell me what you think of bell hooks. And I said, to tell you what I think of bell hooks means that I would have to go beyond bell hooks. Bell hooks is a interpreter, not just for herself, but for many people, her followers, of what black female life is. She is what you call what do you call it? An informant, privileged informant, a person who has both the experience and a lens of interpretation. So if you're not a black woman, you read bell hooks.
Right.
And if you are a black woman and you want to get closer to meaning in your own, you read bell hooks. That is not Kant. That is Hume. That is empiricism. That is complete subjectivity. What, and so then what Hegel says is, no, the rules of logic, the rules of reasoning, call them logic, are not just in the head, but the head must have resonance or parallel objective logic. Hence, did I say anything? Well, Dwight, you seem uncomfortable. I mean, are you?
I'm thinking I'm gonna be Hume for a minute. And I'm
Wait, but hold on, before you be Hume for a minute, man. I mean, hey, look. Damn, I forgot.
Because Hume,
wait, hold on, let me just
would
make.
agree with you. He wouldn't say that. He would say, the subjectivity. He would say you were correct about that.
No, he would, because yeah.
He would have to, because I mean, it's not like he's saying that that's how men think, and he's actually showing that that's in error.
No. If I might disagree.
Go ahead.
See Hume and the British school of philosophy.
Not in Hume's time. You talking about in Hume's time? Not
up till today.
Oh, today. Yeah.
In Hume's time and it's the American school. We just call it pragmatism. And I mean, I would argue this. Once you dig what the deal is, you take a cat like Cornell, total pragmatist. Total pragmatist. Take a dude like Martin Luther King, Hegelian. There's and you look, I'll tell you what you do. Observe the two. I bet you if we sat down over some good wine,
just get it.
You know, and for Samir, I know you drink Crown Royal, so you bring your own.
See how he bring the stuff in?
But if we sat down and we listened to Martin Luther King's speeches and lectures, and we listened to Cornel West's speeches and lectures, we would see something distinctly different. And it's not just in style of presentation. We would see a philosophical difference. Go good.
No, I was so like Kant. You said in the Critique of Pure Reason, he was trying to find the rules of the superstructure.
And that's what he called metaphysics.
Okay.
Before the experience, before the physical encounter. Meta.
Yeah.
Okay, but that would be only from what you can see. Like what is?
Say that one more time.
Like
Only what you can see.
Like like anything that you can.
But
nothing outside of what you can see.
That's right. He says we can't, but see, we have to apply certain rational rules to those experiences if we are to discover truth or meaning in these experiences.
Okay, so then that's different than like the subjective. That's different than the subjective.
No, no, it's completely subjective,
Okay.
but it goes beyond the subjectivity of Hume.
Oh. Okay. Because it relies on you to discover, in a sense.
Well, let me put it another way to you. Hume does not have a metaphysic.
Oh.
Kant does.
No, wait. What do you mean by like?
Yeah, something before experience.
No, well, I was just wondering what experiences. What do you mean by experiences?
Yeah, what we like. Okay, I'm seeing you. I'm listening to you. I hear you. I see you.
Okay.
You know, if you came over here, I slap five with
Yeah.
you. You know, those are experiences.
Okay.
Through they call it
Sensuous.
sensuous.
Mhm.
The senses.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Now, we have trillions of these experiences. Every second, all these experiences. I see Jeremiah, you know, all of this. I'm thinking about going home and eating. So, you know, all of this going on, all of these experiences. Hume says that, well, we don't need a metaphysic, a rational framing of this, or rational tools to bring meaning to that. You know what I'm saying?
They just happen.
Let culture do that. The culture will give us the ways to make sense.
Like the behavior, the interactions of people.
Yeah, or what a civilization says.
Languages and stuff.
Yeah,
Like that?
their values.
Because I'm trying to.
Now hold it. But what Kant says is you can't leave it up to culture.
Right.
You have to have certain rational or logical rules of logic, rules of reasoning. I'll put it that way. Now that's a metaphysic. It is before the experience. Meta, higher, before.
So in a
Now, Hume does not have a metaphysics. Let me just say one other thing. Bring it right up to today. Most 95% of American philosophers, dashiki or no dashiki, you know, super black or super white, they do not have, they'll tell you to your face, don't bring no metaphysics in here. I don't do metaphysics. That's what got European philosophers in trouble. That's why you got Marx and Hitler. They're finally dropped down to that kind of bullshit. No, so let me hold it. I mean, I don't mean to step on your toes, brother. Wait a minute. I think you're human, but that's all right. You see what I'm saying? Now, but here's where Hegel says, hold it. Kant, you do metaphysics. I do metaphysics, but we're doing different metaphysics. You know what I'm saying? And Hegel will ultimately say to Kant, he said, you effed up. You compromise the struggle for the truth by saying you can't know things in their essence. That's how it got down and dirty, as they say in the street. But it was a beautiful down and dirty because they were struggling for an epistemology, a way of knowing. A way of knowing, not just an opinion about something. Now, when they say truth, they're saying the ultimate struggle in knowing is to get at the truth, not to get at an opinion.
Right.
And this is very, very, I mean, this is why so much of American thought is not satisfying at all. You get outside of jazz, I mean, I was going to say something about it. There are areas of American culture and knowledge that just leave you, why waste the time? What are you trying to say to me? And they'll, one of the rejoinders is, well, don't make it too complicated. Well, why not?
Right.
It ain't all that deep. Well, it is. You understand? Oh, it's just a matter of life and death. Don't take it too serious. What the fuck think about it. If I'm lying, I'm flying. Just think about it. You go and you're listening, you turn on cable news, you turn on this, you're listening to an erudite professor, a super Black Lives Matter advocate, a feminist, a trans, and when you finish, listen, you say, well, what did I know that I didn't already know? You understand what I'm saying? So a lot of people in the face of this turn to the comedians. See, I learn more from them than I do from the philosophers. Because at least they see it's irony and a joke. But that's, okay, go ahead, Sarah. I keep cutting across.
I'm just trying to understand the different mindsets. That's all it is. Because when I'm reading Hegel, like, I can see a man who is trying to articulate, but he has already a certain type of thinking, you know. But I don't know. It feels like with Kant, like you can easily think of yourself as God or something like that.
Not Kant. Not Kant. No. Wait a minute. There. No. Hold it there. No, not with Kant.
Okay.
No, Kant. First of all, Kant, neither Hegel or Kant, I don't feel they're arrogant men. They're not. They're,
well, that's not exactly what I'm trying to say. But it's not like it's like you can't know everything, and why can't you know what is
I see what you're saying.
It's not. That's like I guess it was kind of an extreme, but it's just the feeling. I'm just trying to understand, I guess, like where each men are coming from.
Well, I could tell you if I could just suggest this. The line of demarcation. Well, three lines of demarcation. We'll start with Hume.
Okay.
The three philosophers we want to look at, Hume, Kant, and Hegel. For this, just for what we're doing now. Hume is a wonder. He writes wonderfully, in my opinion. I like his writing. He's not keeping it 100, as he would say. And what he says, very simply, what's Hume's masterwork? Somebody do a Google. Somebody do a Google on it. I forget the title right now.
Human understanding.
No.
Human nature. A treatise on human nature. They're talking about
Well, he talks about
a
human
treatise on
understanding.
human nature.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, go ahead.
He writes beautifully.
He does.
And maybe because we didn't have to translate it, it's already in English. But he establishes that, look, all we know is what we experience. How do we make sense of it? Well, that's the work of culture. That's the work of culture. How do we find meaning in our experiences? I said, I use the word how we make sense of it. Really the word is, how do we find meaning? And he says that's what culture does. Kant says, well, Hume is right. That we cannot know a world beyond our experiences. But we cannot leave it up to culture to establish meaning. Another word for meaning is truth. You know? He says there are certain universal rules of reasoning that apply across cultures. If you're Indian, Chinese, African, English, or whatever. we all reason the same way. One, he would say, well, two categories that all human beings use is space and time. See what I'm saying? Those are two fundamentals. He called them a priori conditions of knowing. The word a priori means before the fact or before the experience. That is the realm of metaphysics, of pure thought, before it encounters anything. Okay?
These are categories in the mind.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
bring that to the world.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
cannot escape looking at the world through space.
Absolutely.
You can't escape that. That's the concept.
That's right. But hold it, wait a minute.
Go ahead, but I gotta
Okay,
say
just
about
let me.
Hume.
Hey, wait a minute. I feel that I'm stepping on some
Don't go
toes.
on.
But
Going after him.
but then there's Hegel.
Yeah.
Hegel comes out of the same tradition that Kant comes out of, and that is German. You could say German idealism, German metaphysics. And he says that to know, we do have to have certain rules of thinking. You know what I'm saying? This is what he will ultimately call subjective logic. How our minds work, how we know. Okay? But he says there's a world out there, an objective world, a world that is not us, is other than us. And he says the laws of the objective world are, if not the same, parallel the laws of our thinking, of reasoning. Now he has introduced not just rules of reasoning, that's Kant, laws of reasoning, logic. And he says at the end, this is dialectical logic. Hence, the principal law of thought is the principal law of reality itself, and that is the law of negation. Now, here's my case. This is why I would make the argument for Hegel. I think so much of what goes on in particle physics that is said to be beyond explanation, or we have to fall back into it's all a matter of our minds and our experience, which I don't think has solved much of anything. The way out is through understanding the dialectical, logical character of all phenomena. The other thing is to explain social reality and crisis, like what we're experiencing. Okay, you ain't gonna explain it with Black Lives Matter, you ain't gonna explain it with Trans Lives Matter. Yeah, I mean, all of these, popular culture overlays on this crisis do not explain the crisis. So if I'm a 21 or 22-year-old college graduate, who majored in whatever I majored in, and now I'm out here in the world and I'm seeing all of these contradictions, how do I explain this? How do I get to the truth of this? You understand what I'm saying? Do I a resort back to, well, I'm going to have my truth. I'm a feminist and I'm coming from that. You know? And so one of the arguments for all of these different things is, well, there's so many, truth is so complicated that we have to acknowledge that everybody got their own truth. So I got a friend, you Marxists, I said, wait, dog, don't try to stereotype me. You know, yeah, really, damn, they get into cursing and all and stop talking to each other. He's a follower of Kawaida principles, cultural nationalism. You know, it's like a religion. Marxism and cultural, I'm saying, wait a minute. First of all, the two are not equivalent. No, but we all have our own truths. That's what he will say. You Marxists have your truth, and we cultural nationalists have our truth, and so on and so forth. You understand what I'm saying? It's just like people say, well, you like Du Bois, but I like Booker T. Washington. Don't step on my thing. I'm doing me. You do you. That's what it ends up. That's why Hegel said it all boils down to a matter of opinion. There is no way to assess objective truth. And that's why I keep going back to the particle physics thing, because it was so raw and out in the open the way Niels Bohr and them articulated it. I mean, today, in today's world, you would have to say, excuse me, Money, have you spent time up on Kensington Avenue? Because he sounded like a cat on fentanyl. He said, look,
Stop it.
think about it. Electrons only come into existence when, by whatever means, experimentation or whatever, we experience them. Right. And therefore they are a product of us. There is no objective reality. I mean, it's a form of Kantianism, but in my mind, it goes way beyond. It's like going back to Hume. It is applying Hume to particle physics. And then on top of it, going forward, the intervention of powerful political forces who say, look, shut the whole thing down, just make bombs. Because if you continue this philosophical debate, you might end up in the camp of dialectical materialism. And that's the worst of all outcomes. You know, that is where we are. That is...
Go ahead.
So that's what I would say. I mean, if you look at it from that time, you know, which culminates in the philosophy struggle with Hegel. He is the revolutionary break. I don't care how you cut it. And then everything after him is either to reclaim and restore him to his rightful place or to retreat from him. Go ahead.
No.
It's a profound drama, among other things. It is a wonderful drama. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I guess what you're saying, it makes me, well, I don't know if this is exactly right, but I feel like it helps to clarify somewhat, like, what is the philosophy that underlies, like, basically how the ruling class operates, because I feel like it's almost like they're betting on this thing of, as long as we can maintain or shape appearances of things, that's enough. Like, whether it's war, whether it's the economy, you know, as long as we can, as long as we can basically, like, make sure that people have, like, that people see things a certain way, and basically dominate whatever people see and experience, like, that should be enough in order to basically maintain our position and to, like, start all these wars and all that stuff. And they don't believe in, like, yeah, they don't believe in truth, or they don't believe
No.
in like the actual movement of history and of like justice, I guess. But yeah.
You know, I think there's a lot to be said for what you said. You know, one of the things, you know, like they would say, we have to deal with the practical matters of running a society, of running a state. And that does not leave time or space to deal with these metaphysical issues in philosophy. Hold it, wait a minute. And so there is, you know, this American philosophy called pragmatism. And there is no encounter with, amen, there is no encounter. They don't have to, but I'll put it this way, they don't have to deal with a philosophical challenge to American pragmatism. They don't have to deal with it. And because they've kind of subdued or forced into surrender radical philosophers. Go ahead, Dan.
So I was thinking about the physicist thing because you keep on bringing that in the window, but for me going through that experience of like to nuclear and this way of what we beginning to start to think like is that I was always looking into Oppenheimer, not because he worked on atomic bomb, but just some of the discussions that we have, and I kind of believe he was involved in these discussions. The Bhagavad Gita, I'll just say that because you know, I say that because the impact of that as a metaphysical way of thinking about something, but not in just in the domain of
just
physics.
So everybody understands, he said the Gita is the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes, yeah. But not the impact of just physics, wondering about the atomic world, but this other metaphysical world. Hegel might have been somewhat touched by that, but not really disclosing it.
You're right. I think
You know, being in Germany and being among these German type thinkers, you know, but we don't know all of the influences unless they acknowledge it. That what else are you reading? You know, for them to be able to germinate other people from all these other powerful schools or behavior, these behaviorist kind of thinkers, you know what I mean, to get people to go a certain kind of way. So, but I'm saying the impact of Oppenheimer on me is like being with a person that thought like he felt about things, and he just didn't carry out this nuclear thing without some resistance. He was offering some resistance, even if they didn't tolerate it. They never thought that he would be the impact of this resistance that he put forward, and then he put a lot of other people, and it put a lot of them in danger.
I agree
It
with you.
endangered them about the endangerment of what they thought like. Not even that they went out and carried out a sabotage, but it didn't just go down lightly. You know, it influenced a lot of people worldwide.
Does everybody understand what Derek is talking about?
You know, you got to be a little bit familiar with Oppenheimer.
I agree.
I grew up in my childhood, and I'm just reiterating something in some 50-year period. Not I was talking to anybody about physics.
Does everybody know who Oppenheimer was?
You know what I mean? But not to just.
Hold on, man. Make sure they know who Oppenheimer. This is
He
very
said,
important.
Oppenheimer said that it was Krishna. I am Krishna.
You know what I mean?
And who is Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita?
This
He's
is
the
very,
one who,
this is very, this is
he was the
very,
one who-
very important.
It is. He was the
Hold on,
one
wait a minute. But first, let's say who Oppenheimer was.
the one who created the atomic bomb.
Yeah, he led the. That's right.
Yeah. And he was like Krishna had a very many important points. One of the important points that he said in the Bhagavad Gita was that, well, let's look at it right here. He said, you know, I won't leave my friends behind, but if it is my duty to go into heaven, if you're asking me to go into heaven, I'll go into heaven. But I won't leave my friends behind.
I didn't know that. See, this is but this is very important. The, as you put it, the resistance to turning physics into a bomb-making
but not into this type of phenomenon. This is, for me, this is a phenomenon forum because Hegel, all these people that we could bring them in the same room, but that don't mean that everyone wants to bring Oppenheimer sitting next to a Gödel in Germany, all these other irrational thinkers that would carry out a bomb. Just like what the administration we got, there's nothing for them to carry out an atomic bombing mission where there was resistance against making this thing an overall weapon, like to weaponize
in other words,
weaponized thinking.
You see, if I could just, can I just say, there is no metaphysical resistance to war.
Not
This
metaphysical.
is very,
Tangible.
Yes.
Tangible resistance.
this is very important. And I think this is something I was trying to get at. Now, back to Kant, Hume, and Hegel, because Kant had a number of prolegomena on metaphysics, but on morals. For example, Kant has three critiques: critique of pure reason, critique of judgment, and critique of practical reason, which is morality. But many people would say it didn't go far enough. This is so interesting, and you're right about the influences of Hinduism in German philosophy. You know, oh, it's there. It's all over. But you said that Oppenheimer, as an act of moral resistance, went to the Gitas. Now, the other thing, because you also had Einstein, another act of resistance, you know, to the use of physics for bombs. But he did not, I don't think he went to the Gitas. He, and I don't know how he did it, but he represented another pole of resistance. So, but okay, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
I was also thinking about what we were talking about right now and what Jeremiah brought out. This connection between philosophy and state power. The way, I mean, I guess I don't know if I'll get the words right for this, but I think the Marxist hypothesis is that the time, as you evolve in time, you have these, you know, it's like it's the evolution of forces of power and the interplay between them. Again, just I don't know if I'm getting that right, but then there's state power and then there's philosophy. And my naive understanding is that philosophy should be independent, but I don't think it's possible. And this thing that you're describing about Hume and Kant, which by the way all of this is new to me. It seems like this idea that this empiricist idea that everything is just what you experience it. There's no absolute or objective truth. It's just how you experience it. It also goes against universality of humankind. It goes against
there is no question.
Absolute morality and so on.
You're in front of the computer. Yeah, just move it.
Right, so I was thinking that, you know, there must be some connection at every period in time between the philosophy that a civilization produces and state power that is.
This is very, very important.
Whatever you mean by state power, I don't know what's a better word for it, but you know, maybe the ruling class.
If I see, I think we're a little bit on. We're not right on the topic so much, but these are issues, questions that come right out of it. You see, Kant established that there are universal conditions for meaning, for knowing, for the truth. You know, universal. Every human being does it the same way, more or less. Hume said it was all cultural. This is why, and you're right, Derek, that Oppenheimer, once he saw this atomic bomb dropped on the Japanese and what it could do, he said, I forget how he put it, he said some very poetic way, but he said the only conditionality is a higher metaphysics that establishes moral resistance to doing something like this. And he felt it was the Gitas. He went to that metaphysical level. American pragmatism, there are no conditions. There are no higher metaphysical conditions. And this, I think you're right. This is what, in a certain sense, makes state power in the United States so damn dangerous. There's nothing to constrain it.
It's like for them, I'm saying, for them, it's like the God of war is asking them to bring like sacrifices. I mean, this is just
That's what Oppenheimer
strip.
said.
It's like you strip down a human being, but for them, it's always the war got to be picked up before they can write poetry. They rather have war, a marching band. The only way they want to have a marching band is that this war created the marching band. It's like you want to kill a mission. It ain't no divine mission unless it's a killing mission. They don't really know what the divine. They're not even thinking about the divine. You know, we might share. You know.
Go ahead, Jay.
Well, I was just pointing out because I don't mean to cut you off.
No, I want you guys. No, that's all right. That's okay. Because I can talk to him later.
No, you can't.
Gotcha. So you talk about metaphysical, which can be interpreted a lot of different ways.
Hey, Jake, let me ask you, what was it that Oppenheimer quoted from the Gitas? I've seen.
I have now become Christian. You know,
But there was
destroy. He said, "Destroyer of worlds."
Destroyer of worlds.
He said,
Say that again.
I thought because I heard Krishna.
He says, "Now I become that, the destroyer of the
World. Yeah.
But see, that's what I'm saying. When it comes to metaphysical, right? We can talk about X, Y, and Z. But what I would say is that it also provides a moral set, a moral compass. So he said he interpreted Shiva as destroyer of worlds, right? Now I remember the free schools, the young lady, Indian, she said, you know, okay, Shiva or the mother or Kali, right? Similar. All of the gods that are, you know, of the peoples that are oppressed, just so happen to be evil. You know, the god of, Jesus Christ, I'm sure he was as white as snow, right? So, you know, what I'm saying is that, especially, you know, in Israel, Syria, Jerusalem, that area, there's a lot of sun there. But yeah, he was plain white, you know. So what I think is important to remember is the fact that you know, our religion, however it comes, our religion is a moral compass. The moral.
Hey, Dick and Jake, and this gets us right to the point of Jeremiah's point.
Yeah.
Once you lose power or you separate power from anything other than power, you're in a danger.
But that's the thing.
Yeah.
Baldwin worked this out in '64. He said that money, he said that things or whatever, and he said that power is not temporary or is not constant. He said that birth, death, struggle, and love are constant. And I'd like to continue on my point in terms of morality. Morality, I would say, you know, it shows us, you know, how to help people grow. It shows us how to teach our children. So, for example, in Judaism, you know, Moses went up to the mountain, talked to God, they say, you know, and then he said that he came down, and I'm not saying this. I don't want anybody to join Judaism. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm not. The state of Israel doesn't seem to be following it very well. But what I am saying is that you know, in Judaism, the Ten Commandments were that of X, Y, and the fourth one was, like, for example, respect your parents, or for example, or thou shalt not kill and steal, or you know, thou shalt X, Y, and Z. And these were basic moral principles, you know, which I feel are important, especially in light of ideas like nonviolence or ideas like insuraj, you know, that is self-governance and not being violent, and these moral principles. And I feel that, you know, we're at a time when people, the peoples of the world, we need our moral principles. And we certainly need other things as well, but you know, that's to finish my point.
No, but that's right on time. That's right on time to what we're doing. But let me let Dwight come in. And,
all right. Well, with Hume, I'm going to talk about Hume, and I'm going to say something about morality. With Hume, I think he disagreed about the culture part. Hume was trying to say, where do your ideas come from? Your ideas originate in experience. What does he mean by that? For example, the human mind, and he writes it, he says, can imagine anything. I can imagine a house walking, a dog in a human body. So your human mind. And so he says your ideas originate in experience. For example, think about, and that's why he was anti-metaphysics. Think about the concept of God. Where does in his day it was difficult because he appeared that he could be an atheist. God, think about it, all-knowing. I know that from experience. All-powerful. I know that from experience. You combine all of these things together, and now you come up with an idea of God.
oh, okay.
You see, so also he says, where do your ideas originate? That's when we talk about experience. And so he would agree with you about, you know, culture. He said, you know, your ideas would originate. And in fact, Marx would be closer to Hume than Hegel because of the materials.
Really?
And that's what I think.
See, the university co-opted Hume. The university, you know, has made people think that, you know, Hume and one's experience is in and of oneself.
Because
that's the problem.
Right. Because, for example, I'll be real quick. For example, touching heat. For example, baby. I tell the baby, I say, this is hot. Well, how do you know it's hot? You have to experience it to know that it's hot. Just by me logically telling you, well, it feels like this and that. Now, with morality, when Tony was talking about objective and subjective, if Kathy says it's snowing outside. I says it's raining outside. Well, objectively, you know, subjectively, I'm saying it's snowing. That's what I feel. And she said, but the truth is independent of what we think.
Absolutely.
So it's outside. So it's clear outside. You can say that. So
can I just say this? Independent of our experience.
Independent of our experience, right? And on morality, which is why the problem with what he was getting at was talking about objective. Morality, 2 + 2 equals, we all agree that 2 + 2 equals 4. But is abortion wrong? Can you objectively say that murder is wrong? I mean, you understand what I'm saying? Can you objectively say that killing is, you know, 2 + so?
It's a matter of experience.
Well, yeah, but you get my point about when you have a moral question.
Of course.
You can't, it's not like 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah, no, that's
You know,
right.
It's not,
That's
it's
right, that's
different.
right.
It's different.
Yeah.
And so when you're searching for objectivity,
Yeah,
that's what,
Yeah.
that's why there's
yeah.
that underlying part.
Some
And
of the education.
so when you were talking about metaphysics, you know, like, you know, a lot of philosophers got a problem with, you know, metaphysical thought, you know,
Mhm.
trying to throw, because Hume tried to throw it out, you know, like,
Uh-huh.
what's all this metaphysics,
Yeah,
you know,
uh-huh.
because it said where your ideas come from, God and all this, you know,
Mhm.
spooky stuff, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
And even Mao was sort of,
Yeah, now
you know,
see, now
you
see
know,
truth
to
for
see,
that.
you know, to see it.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is that it wouldn't be fair to Hume to say he would agree with you, in fact,
Yes.
that but he would say where are we getting these ideas
I know,
from?
that's right.
Where do you think and that
That's the most
and
important
if you
part.
think about it, he gives a very powerful argument.
Absolutely.
Where do you get all these where your ideas come from? Where does the idea of God come from? Where does the idea of you know, it's based in something that we experience. For example, only last I don't like to talk too much, but say the idea of pregnancy.
Mhm.
You know, like if a woman has how would you describe to me what it's like to be pregnant? You would have to talk about an experience. Like, oh, it feels like a stomach ache. For me to know it, to know what it is.
Mhm.
And also that's sort of like you said about, you know, being black, being Chinese, whatever, the experience, knowing. Because I don't know what it's like to be the one child ruler in China. I don't experience, I have to, you know, knowing. And that's
Mhm.
why experience is important, but anyway, I just wanted to share that with you.
That's very beautiful. But go ahead, Seraphina.
No, nothing. Just to add. I guess with Hegel, or maybe this is something you mentioned about like the imagination, or like you know, like kind of like the. How did you put it? It's like some creative match with the scientific. I don't know, but I just know that the imagination is kind of like.
In the art,
Not
I'm
in,
oh, I'm sorry.
well,
forgive me.
not in that sense. I'm sorry, not in that sense. But
Go ahead, what was your name, Serafina?
But
Hold on, she was finished. She wasn't
no,
finished.
I wasn't.
Yeah.
uh,
Fine.
yeah,
Hold on.
what Dwight said is very, very important. You know, there's no way to rule out the experiential, the experience part of knowing. You know, and here is where the big issue, one of the big issues in epistemology, including quantum physics, but all of the moral questions that you raise, the contradiction between the objective and the subjective is
What was it?
the contradiction between the subjective and the objective. You know what I'm saying? And this is, you know, this problem, you know, too often in contemporary philosophy is shunted aside. Now, to Kant's credit, he tried to come up with some objective conditions of morality, of moral decision making. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, and stuff like that. I think, you know, and this, to me, this was one of the things that kind of came up in the China conference.
That's important. The subject and the
Wait, hey, Jake, let me just say.
That's a false dichotomy.
Very interesting
Thank you.
question. But
Very
let me just kind of develop this point. When we were dealing with Mao, the subjective, where Mao believed that the subject of history, the agent of history, the people, could surmount any and every objective obstacle. You know what I'm saying? This, and it, you know, because remember we talked. See the question, you see the problem, it is not resolved. It is not resolved. And, you know, to resolve, like you take these moral questions, it would require a new level of societal and civilizational development, I think.
That's what that's all these texts are stating. Like, this is the moral set. So then what? What does that mean? It means one has to be, in terms of, if one wants to self-govern,
that's right.
One has to be moral.
A monk.
Is there moral truth?
Well, but see, this
certainly
is
experience.
That's the question.
yeah. But that's a part of is there truth?
Yeah. Says truth. But we're all here.
And the question is truth a purely metaphysical question?
Isn't that the most modern point?
On this term.
I think what's important, I'm sorry, I don't mean to
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go
Say X, Y,
ahead.
Z. But first of all, hope everybody's having a good day. Second of all,
Keep talking, Jake. I gotta go to the bathroom.
yeah, hey man, listen. Gotta do what you gotta
That's
do.
experiential. That's experience.
And it's part of the truth. It's crazy. Went out, went to the bathroom. We live. But at the end of the day, when it comes to when it comes to a moral or this question of like subjective and objective and all these things, you know, you can like throw out kind of like a gaslight or however you want to say it. You know, you can say however you want. You know, you can kind of say however and whatever be the case, but still, like, the orange is there. This is a conversation that I have with, like, people all the time. Like, they're like, okay, it's my truth, but my truth. How can the truth be yours? You know, how can the truth be anyone's? First of all. Second of all, it's there. That the oranges are there, right? Can we debate that? There are some things that, you know, if we were to debate it, it would drive us mad. You know, and I think what's important about that point is that, you know, okay, we can, like, say I want to control somebody. Is that there or not? See what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's easy. We can debate that literally till the cows come home.
But our senses verify that.
Tasty too. I think one thing that was important about Baldwin, what he said was he told his nephew to trust his experience.
We should end it too. Yeah, we should. Yeah.
Well, I guess what I want to add is that you guys can see, or I can see, we all can see that the movement towards moral truth, or you know, this dialectical changes. That's things. You know, is it true that you should never kill? Is it true that you should only have one baby? Was that a pragmatic thing? What, you know, in a country, you know. So how do we determine?
How do you make that judgment?
Yeah. How do you
Well,
make these
you
judgments?
have to look at the conditions.
Right, exactly, and that's exactly what we're talking about. Because if you look at it statically, you should never kill. You should never have an abortion. You know, if you look at it in a static way, you know, in terms of absolutes can often cause oppression of a person. because you have to make adjustments.
How does thou shalt not kill, for example,
Adjustments.
cause oppression?
Huh?
How does thou shalt not kill cause oppression?
How does thou shall not? Well,
Like he's more oppressive.
well, look. Here's what a utilitarian. For example, you got too many people,
Okay.
and you got a whole lot of people crowded together.
How,
Somebody got to go.
it's weird because it's almost like it's organized that way.
But well, look. Unfortunately, it's good that people die. Why? Because if we didn't die, we would all be crowded. I mean, we don't like to think that way.
Well, but
think about it for a
so
moment.
much land in America.
No.
Yes.
If my great grandmother was living, and all of our great grandmothers was living, we would have a problem. And on beyond.
Yeah.
So the point is, so that's why, like you can think of civilizations where a culture.
There's all this land.
For example, in the well, I'll give you an example. Here's the worst. Eskimos. They were very nomadic people. They believed they practiced infanticide. Killing the children.
Kill the kids.
Well, if you're a nomadic person, this had nothing to do with whether they love their children. They did all they love their children. But if you were out in the Arctic and you're traveling and you got a lot of women and men died because they would go whale hunting, right? So if a woman had a lot of kids and they didn't have what? Sonograms, they didn't have abortion. So if you had sex, you just putting them out. So they would say, you take my kid. If you can't take my kid, then we would have to get rid of it. Or if you were an older person, and grandma, we have older, and grandma can't survive. Grandma's no use to the community. She can't move on. Put on iceberg. It had nothing to do with me loving grandma. It had to do with survival. And of course, and that sounds so morally disgusting to us, but put in contemporary society, when my mother gets sick, I can put her in a hospital, put her on a machine, have a heartbeat, stuff like that. Or so this changes. In other words, but what I'm saying,
do you think?
What I'm saying is
Do you
that
think it's morally good?
No, he's saying.
I'm saying maybe survival sometimes.
Yeah, he's arguing a relativist position rather than an absolute.
Right. And I'm talking about I am arguing. I'm saying that sometimes, given what's important, would be survival. In some situations, because you may have to do some. For example, in China, they had the one-child rule.
Could they feel?
No, but look. Wait a minute. In China, they had the one-child rule. So if the government, if this is the West, I'm from the West. Yeah. I'm a Christian. I'm a Jew. How could they do that?
Where are you from?
I'm saying if I said I was a Christian, I'm saying I'm a Christian living in America.
Yeah.
They got the one-child rule in China. I'm judging. I'm a Westerner.
Yeah.
I'm making a judgment of Chinese people.
Okay.
I'm saying and if she has a child, and then they say to her that her husband, they have a child, and I say you have to kill that child.
In America, what I'll say is that you have freedom to speak.
But wait a minute, Jake. See, I think.
But that doesn't, hold on, that doesn't mean that you have the freedom to dictate.
Jake, hold on.
No, I'm
Because
saying.
we have to leave at 2 o'clock.
Right.
But this is a very, very, very important discussion.
Right.
And if I,
Go ahead.
no, I mean, we must return to it. And we do have to also connect it to this issue of objective and subjective.
Good.
There's something very, very complicated
That's right.
in that moment. And and I'm telling just like y'all are, the way y'all are debating and discussing it, for some things there are no moral answers,
Difficult.
or very difficult, or and it would take humanity as a whole to solve certain of these issues. So, let's
I mean,
We'll-
what,
we'll-
I mean,
we'll
what, are you, what are you saying? What are you saying?
Wait a minute, hold on, Jay. We'll continue.
Asking a question.
We have to go into.
Okay.
Um,
Well, that's not
I'm just trying to summarize things. Can we agree next week? I think we've gotten to the core of certain questions vis-a-vis Hume, Kant, and Hegel. We've dealt with, in the previous things, some of the questions of science and particle physics. So we have a lot. Now today we've approached some of the huge moral questions. And I'm very, very grateful to you coming, Dwight. I mean, it's very, very, very good.
Yes.
And
I like you guys.
yeah.
I like you too.
Hey Doc, before could we end on just a couple of Facebook comments?
Oh yes, please. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Yeah. Just speak a little loud too, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Anna.
Magna says, like when you were talking about the interconnectedness of, I think, dialectics or something. Well, Magna says, I love this formulation of interconnected contradictions. It fits the complexity of social reality, but connects it to the search for the truth, unlike intersectionality. It reminds me of dialectics through triads, for example, black worker, white worker, planter. And then I think, okay, two more. Also I'm sorry, Danny, but I know you left a comment earlier, but I can't find it on my phone anymore because there's so many comments. But he says, it is an irony that older metaphysics had a higher concept of thinking.
Had a higher what?
Concept
Concept.
of thinking.
Yeah.
It had to do with the naivete of distinguishing subject and object, a point Lenin makes about Aristotle. The discovery of this separation of the subject and object is really a modern accomplishment. It had started as a dualism. Think, therefore I am. But Kant is really overcoming that the subject is giving form to material given. Hegel is going to say Kant talks about an objective logic, which Kant calls transcendental logic. It is the labor of thought. It is very inspired by political economy. Hegel is reading Adam Smith at Jena. And then Emil asks the question, how would thou shall not kill principle apply to anti-colonial struggles? Can we honestly impose idealistic appeals to people who have been invaded?
He's talking about Fanon.
So how would thou shall not kill principle apply to anti-colonial struggles? Can we honestly impose idealistic appeals to people who have been invaded?
Alright, if we gotta go, let's do it.
We're gonna leave in a minute. Okay. Are there any women? Are there any more comments there?
No, that's it. I didn't finish Danny's. Oh, and then he includes a quote from Hegel. Quote, but what with Kant is a result forms the immediate starting point in this philosophizing, so that the preceding exposition from which that result issued, and which is a philosophical cognition, is cut away beforehand. The Kantian philosophy thus serves as a cushion for intellectual indolence, which soothes itself with the conviction that everything is already proved.
Could just read, but Kantianism is what? Read it a little louder. Could you just read that one? What Kantianism is?
The Kantian philosophy
Yes.
thus serves as a cushion for intellectual indolence, which soothes itself with the conviction that everything is already proved and so.
This is very interesting. He said Kantian philosophy serves invalids.
As a cushion?
Is it?
Indolence.
Huh?
Indolence?
Idiocy.
Oh, indolence.
Yeah.
Indolent?
Oh. Oh, indolence. That's interesting. How would you interpret that? Would anybody? I mean, this makes my point about how harsh Hegel can be towards Kant. You know, what is the word indolence means? Like going to closing down, shutting down into, what's the, somebody look up the word
Serious,
indolence.
meaningful word there.
Huh? Laziness. Laziness. See, this is very interesting. And he says, because Kantianism gives you this warm and fuzzy feeling that all problems are solved within his system. Does that make sense what I just said? Now, he may have been a little too harsh. I think Kant would have said, my system shows you how to solve problems. Maybe not that all problems are solved. But then in showing you how to, he is saying there is this way and only this way, which is a problem. Now, of course, and I'll just end on this, Kant moves beyond a metaphysical relativism. He's not saying everybody's opinion is the same, or everybody's approach to knowledge is the same. He's saying there is good reasoning, and this is how it's done, more or less, and there's bad reasoning. Whew, okay. I guess we'll say goodbye to everybody. Lord have mercy.
You covered some room today.
Y'all know, you know what it means when we say Lord have mercy, right? That's like black people saying like,
I don't know what it means by feeling it.
yeah.